All right, good morning and welcome. This is the meeting of the Tuolumne County Board of Equalization. Clerk, will you please announce the agenda for today?
And the pledge.
I didn't see that, so I was looking for that. Will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Is Sherry with us today?
And do we have Sherry on the phone? Sherry, are you with us?
I am.
There she is.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, let's begin. Clerk, would you please read the agenda and public participation procedures for today?
Okay. In order to protect public health and the safety of our Tuolumne County citizens, this Board of Supervisors meeting will be physically closed to the public. During the board meeting, citizens who wish to comment should be prepared to use our call-in line at 209-533-6581 to queue for verbal public comment. Public comment will be open and closed individually for each agenda item listed below. If you wish to comment on a specific item, please call in when the board clerk has read the item. The chair will ask if there are any comments from the public, and at that time, your call will be taken in the order it is received. The public comment time limit on each item is set for 3 minutes per speaker. The time limit does not apply to staff. Options for public access audio and video live streaming. The public will not have access for public comments through these media. These are available for audio and visual only. First option is the Tuolumne County website, www.tuolumnecounty.ca.gov/745/board-meetings. Option number 2, access Tuolumne County at www.accesstuolumne.org and click Watch Live. Option number 3, Zoom webinar via computer at https://zoom.us/98737385155. I'll read that one more time. 987-373-85155, and or by calling in at 1-669-900-9128 with webinar ID 987-3738-5155. Important public notice. Under the Governor's Executive Order N2520, this meeting will allow members of the Board of Supervisors to participate by teleconference. And under Order N2520, accessibility requirements. If you need swift special assistance during the board meeting, please call 209-533-6581.
Okay, thank you. Will you read our first, looks like appointment A?
9 a.m. public hearing, Board of Equalization. Item A, consideration of approving minutes of the February 7th, 2017 meeting.
Okay, I'll look to...
Move to approve. Second.
So I have a motion by Supervisor Gray and a second by Supervisor Rutherford. I'll look to see if we have any public comment on the minutes from February 7th, 2017. I'm looking to see, no public comment. So I have a motion and a second. Clerk, would you please read the roll call? So the motion was by Supervisor Gray. Second was by Supervisor Rutherford.
Thank you. Supervisor Sherry Brennan?
Aye.
Supervisor Ryan Campbell?
Aye.
Supervisor Anaya Kirk?
Aye.
Supervisor John Gray?
Aye.
Supervisor Rutherford?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes unanimously. Will you please read item B on our agenda today?
Item B, consideration of application of Safeway, Inc. for changed assessment number 4 for fiscal year 2018-2019 and changed assessment number 8 for fiscal year 2019-2020.
Okay. So at this time, I'll look to see, we'll be swearing in our applicant and our appellant. And do you need to read the application first?
Mr. Busker, can you hear us clearly?
Yes, I can.
Oh, great, thank you. Can you please raise your right hand and repeat after me? I solemnly affirm that the evidence that I shall give be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
And then Assessor's Office staff, can you please do the same? I solemnly affirm that the evidence that I shall give be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll start with, sorry, just looking to,
Okay,
County Council
so
here.
then the next thing would just be for the clerk of the board to announce the nature of the application, the assessed value as it appears on the roll, and the applicant's opinion of the assessed value. That is all found on the appeal forms.
Got it. I have it right here in front of me. I will start with application number 4 for fiscal year 2018-2019. Application number 4, the address is 1291 San Guinetti Road, Sonora, California, 95370. Assessor's parcel number 056640-003-00. Roll year 2018-2019. Issue is the value of fixtures and business personal property. The assessed value for fixtures is $411,640. Personal property was assessed at $1,930,390 for a total of $2,342,030. The applicant's opinion of values for fixtures is $205,820. The applicant's opinion of values for personal property is $965,195 for a total of $1,171,015.
okay, thank you very much for that. So what I'll do is I'll look to Mr. Buskirk first to briefly describe the property, and then I'll look to, I guess, to the assessor's office to do the same, and then after which we will present evidence to be entered into the record. Does that work for everyone?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll start with you, Mr. Buskirk. Can you briefly describe the property in question?
Well, before we get started, I can hear myself on your end, but there's a lag of about a second or two. So that might make it kind of distracting, during the presentation. So would it be possible to mute on your end?
So I'll look to the folks.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, or the clerk read in the address, and then the roll value. So our opinion of value on the application is different from what our final opinion of value is, but I can give you that number as the presentation goes along. I'm not exactly sure what other information you're looking for as far as the description of the property, though.
So the purpose of this is just to really set the stage for what the board will be hearing today. So it's really either party describing the property, the issues that the board will be requested to determine, and if there's any agreements or stipulations by the parties.
Okay. Yeah, so it's a Safeway store. We're not contesting the value of the real estate portion, the land and improvements. We're only contesting the fixtures and business personal property. And then our value, it's based on market data. It's based on comparable sales of similar properties. We're looking at quantifying a certain amount of obsolescence with the value of the equipment inside the store. We believe that using the market data that we have, it gives us the ability to quantify functional and economic obsolescence without having to use any kind of complicated formulas or anything like that. The idea behind that is when you have these buyers in the market, they know what they're going to pay for this equipment, and they're familiar with it, so they're able to consider all the forms of obsolescence and what they believe market value is.
Okay, thank you. Now I'll look to the assessor's office. Could you please briefly describe the property, the issues the board will be requested to determine, and any agreements or stipulations agreed to by the parties from the perspective of the assessor's office?
Yes, I can. Good morning. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Rachel Jones. I'm the Assistant Assessor Recorder. This is Janelle Meyer. She's our Auditor Appraiser.
Could you turn on your microphone? And, okay.
Can you hear me now? Are we good?
So if you bring it down, there you go.
Here we go.
Much better. Thank you.
This is Janelle Meyer. She's our Auditor Appraiser. The Safeway appeal, from our understanding of what the applicant has given us so far, he's been appealing lots of business property up and down the state of California for Safeway properties. We feel our first point that we feel is appropriate is the Board of Equalization does a property tax valuation study. If a particular business that is a common business in a state, it's not unique, like grocery stores are all over California, if they feel their business property is improperly assessed, they can apply to the board for a property tax valuation study, and the Board of Equalization will go in and look at how business property is being assessed across the state of California. We feel that's actually the better remedy for him at this time, but we are here to talk about his business property that he hasn't chosen to do that, and that's fine. In the case of Safeway today, Mr. Buskirk feels that a obsolescence factor is a better representation of the value of the business property. The Board of Equalization, we're very bound by the rules of the Board of Equalization on how we can assess property. The first thing to know about assessing business property is businesses give us a business property statement. They have to send in a business property statement every single year. We use their business property statement to value their business property. They put the numbers on their business property statement, and we use their numbers for valuing their business property. So the numbers we're using today for Safeway were given to us by Safeway. The point of contention is whether to use an obsolescence table or to use a life table. They are somewhat the flip side of the same coin. If you are 50%, if you have 50% depreciation, you have 50% life. It's the flip side of the same coin. So Brent will get into that argument, and then we will be able to present our side of that argument. But our understanding right now of the central question is how to depreciate this property properly, the way that we're doing it right now, or the way he suggests that we do it. That's the central question. We do feel that we are giving it an appropriate life table. These were looked at by the board in 2004, and the life table was reduced at that time, and we're using that appropriate life table now.
All right, thank you very much for that. At this time, we'll begin hearing evidence Each party will present evidence, and it will be entered into the record. Each party has prepared packets that are labeled as exhibits. They'll be presented to the board during this hearing, and and will be entered into evidence. We'll start with the applicant, Mr. Buskirk. Can you please talk about the evidence that you'd like to enter into the record?
Sure. So should we just go exhibit by exhibit right now?
Sure.
Okay. I'm going to try to figure out how to share my screen here. Okay. So what you see, or what you should be seeing, is Exhibit 1. I'm sorry, I haven't done a virtual hearing like this before, so I'm trying to work through this. So Exhibit 1, this is just our narrative. It just kind of goes over a summary of what we'll be talking about with this hearing. The code sections that we're relying on, the property tax rules that we're relying on, as well as the market data that we're relying on. So first, I just wanted to go over a couple of property tax rules. First, we have Rule 321, which says, subject to exceptions set by law, it is presumed that the assessor has properly performed his or her duties. The effect of this presumption is to impose upon the applicant the burden of proving that the value on the assessment roll is not correct, or where applicable, the property in question has not been otherwise correctly assessed. The law requires that the applicant present independent evidence relevant to the full value of the property or other issue presented by the application. If the applicant has presented evidence and the assessor has also presented evidence, then the board must weigh all of the evidence to determine whether it has been established by a preponderance of the evidence that the assessor's determination is incorrect. The presumption that the assessor has properly performed his or her duties is not evidence and shall not be considered by the board in its deliberations. So just to summarize, both sides have to present independent evidence when we get to the assessment appeals hearing, and the board needs to determine by a preponderance of the evidence. So just what is more likely to be true. And then just the fact that the assessor has properly performed his or her duties is not in itself evidence, and that the assessor also needs to present evidence at the hearing. Next, we have the value concept, which is property tax rule 2. Basically just defines full cash value. And just to summarize, it's really what a willing buyer will pay a willing seller for a piece of property. And that's something that we relied on with our market sales information that we'll be presenting. Okay. So on page 2 of Exhibit 1, we have a summary on what the Board of Equalization and what the California Assessors Association are and the role that they play in this case. So in 1996, the Board of Equalization had a policy 10, or actually, I'm sorry, it was withdrawn in 1996. So prior to 1996, that was the policy as far as the guidelines go for using the cost approach. So they had a certain set of guidelines for different categories of equipment. And like I said, that was withdrawn in 1996. So once that was withdrawn, there was a void that was left. They didn't have those guidelines anymore. And that's when the CAA, or the California Assessors Association, came into play. So they had their own set of guidelines, which it basically mirrored what the Board of Equalization had done. The guidelines were not based on any kind of market studies or market information. It was based on opinions and experience of Board of Equalization and CAA members. So only a portion of these guidelines were actually based on any kind of study. And when that happens, that type of equipment actually gets its own table. So you have things like personal computers, network equipment, biotech, semiconductors. There's an actual study that's done on that equipment and it gets its own table. But for grocery store equipment, there hasn't been any kind of study like that. And as the assessor mentioned, the life or the recommended life actually was lowered. I believe it was in 2004. I haven't seen any studies on that as to why they did it. I've done dozens of hearings for Safeway and the related companies, and I haven't seen any evidence as to how that happened. So to our knowledge, there is no study like this to show that the 12-year life that they're recommending is accurate, or actually what it's even based on. So on page 3, we have a summary of the cost approach. So every year, as the assessor mentioned, taxpayers submit their business property statement or the 571L form to the assessor's office to value under the cost approach. So basically what they do is they have the equipment classified into different categories, and each of those categories gets its recommended trend table. They take the costs and they apply a corresponding trend factor, and it's basically the opposite of depreciation. They figure out how much life is left on that property, and then it's supposed to give you fair market value. And like I said, it's a 12-year life that's recommended for grocery store equipment. They have other equipment in the store as well. They have the POS equipment, which gets it's an untrended 8-year life. So it's just a percent good factor on that category. They don't actually trend the cost or index the cost upward. They also have personal computers. They have network equipment. In some cases, they may have leasehold improvements, or office equipment, different electronic equipment like money counters. But about 90% or so of the value is with the grocery store equipment, and that's what gets the 12-year life. So we have things like shelving, refrigeration, freezers, check stands, things like that. Just basic supermarket equipment. So moving down page 3, we talk about external and functional obsolescence. So, I'm sorry, did you say something?
No, we didn't have any questions on our end.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought I heard someone talking.
Nope. You go ahead.
As far as obsolescence goes, typically, say for example, we have some kind of manufacturing plant. Let's say they make plastic bottles. If we think that there's some kind of obsolescence with this kind of business, we would look at their production. We would see what they're capable of doing versus what they actually did. And then we can quantify the obsolescence that way. We could do that for both functional and external obsolescence. But measuring that obsolescence that way with grocery stores, it's a little bit difficult. They don't really produce. It's more revenue driven. And the revenue is really going to depend on what they sell. Like it could be an upper end grocery store. It could be a lower end. And there's also brand recognition that plays a factor in the revenue of each of these stores. But the way that we were able to quantify this was by looking at just the equipment itself and how much it can sell for. Because like I said, these are well-informed buyers that come out to buy this equipment. And they know all the different forms of obsolescence that may be present. They know that this equipment, it may have different government regulations, especially with refrigeration, because the government guidelines for things like the different refrigerants that they use or the energy consumption, they're changing all the time. So once these guidelines change, the older equipment is not as valuable as it used to be, especially with refrigerant, because there are certain refrigerants that are no longer able to be used. And the equipment, it can be retrofitted in many cases so that the newer refrigerants can be used, but it comes with a major cost. So that's something that they take into consideration when they buy this equipment. But there's other factors that we considered. Consumer taste is changing. There's other technology that's coming in, like we have the Amazon Go stores where they don't have any check stands at all. You have an app on your phone that knows when you come in, it knows when you go out, it knows exactly what you bought. technology is advancing at an exponential rate in this industry. So that it plays a role in what the older equipment is worth. So that's why we think that using the market sales is actually the best method to estimate fair market value. So moving down on pages 3 and 4, we have some of the stores, the comparable sales of these stores that we considered. So we looked at things like the size of the store. There's some stores that are more typical size. It could be between, say, 30 and 40,000 square feet. And we also have smaller stores like the old Fresh and Easies that used to be around. Those stores are a lot smaller, usually between like 15 to maybe 20,000 square feet. So we would make an adjustment for that. We would adjust for the average age of the equipment because, like I said, when you have the older equipment that may not adhere to the new government regulations, it affects the value. But it's not just that. It's also the wear and tear on the equipment. But we looked at the average age of the comparable sales. We make an adjustment for that. The location plays a role. But after we make all these adjustments, we came up with a price per square foot. And this is a method that's also recommended by Marshall and Swift, which we'll present an exhibit on later. But Marshall and Swift, they recommend a price per square foot, and then you can adjust that for the location that the store is going to be built in. But basically, it's the replacement cost of all the equipment in the store. So we want to know how much would it cost to rebuild one of these stores, a typical grocery store, and then we'll adjust it for, like I said, things like age. But Marshall and Swift also, they provide a depreciation factor. So we looked at our market sales analysis, and then we compared that with what Marshall and Swift recommends by depreciating the replacement cost. And the numbers are fairly similar. We also, on page 4, we have an exhibit with several letters that we received from different people in the industry. Some of them may work in the grocery stores, some may work for equipment manufacturers or experts in actually selling the equipment. And typically we would have a witness who's sold Safeway's equipment for the last 20 years or so. So he's actually come to testify for us in person at other hearings, but unfortunately he wasn't able to do that today. But based on the conversations that we've had with him, and based on the testimony he's given at other boards, he believes that using a 12-year life for grocery store equipment just grossly overstates the real market value of this equipment. So we have letters that kind of summarize their opinions as well. And then if we move on to page 5, you can see our numbers summarize for the 2 lien dates that we have today. So we're looking at the 2018 and the 2019 lien dates, and the case is going to be the same for both of those. So whatever the board decides for 2018, we would ask to apply to 2019 as well. So for 2018, that's the first set of numbers you see. You see the allocation we have to fixtures and personal property, and an overall opinion of value of $1,240,850. And then for 2019, our overall opinion of value is $1,109,324. Okay, so that's just kind of a summary of what we'll be presenting today. If anybody has any questions, I can answer those before we move on to Exhibit 2.
Okay, I'll look to see if there are any questions for the applicant from the board. Sherry, any questions?
No.
Okay, at this time, we will, did you have more? Did you want to continue presenting evidence?
Yeah, we have about 25 exhibits or so, but this is just the summary.
Okay, so no questions on this exhibit. So you can continue.
Okay. I just want to make sure that the screen that I'm sharing is just the exhibit, right? Okay.
Yes.
I've never done a hearing like this before, so I just want to make sure I'm doing it right. Okay, so moving on to Exhibit 2, we have the actual references that we're using. So I referenced in Exhibit 1, Rule 321. So you see it right here, and I've highlighted the important sections. So in subsection A, just says it's presumed that the assessor has properly performed his or her duties. And then in section B, just says that the board needs to establish, or the board needs to determine by preponderance of the evidence that the assessor's value is incorrect, and that the presumption that the assessor has properly performed his or her duties is not evidence. Okay, so on page 2, we have Rule 324. So again, just reiterates the preponderance of the evidence standard. And then below that, you see highlighted in the middle, it says the board is not required to choose between the opinions of value promoted by the parties to the appeal, but shall make its own determination. So the board doesn't have to decide to sustain the roll value or go with the applicant's value. It could be somewhere in the middle. Okay, so on page 4, we have Code Section 110, which was the basis for Rule 2, which is what I explained earlier, just the definition of full cash value, where we estimate that, or I'm sorry, full cash value is defined as what a willing buyer will pay a willing seller in an open market transaction. Okay, on page 10, we have Rule 2 again, the value concept. So it's just defining full cash value. Rule 3, we have the value approaches. So the 2 highlighted are the 2 approaches that we considered for today's hearing. So part A, the price or prices at which property and comparable properties have recently sold, which is the comparative sales approach. And then C, the cost of replacing reproducible property with new property of similar utility, or of reproducing the property at its present site and at present price levels, less the extent to which the value has been reduced by depreciation, including both physical deterioration and obsolescence, which is the replacement or reproduction cost approach. Okay, so Rule 4, just give a little more detail on the comparative sales approach. Basically taking the sale price and converting it into value. So going on to page 17, this is a section from Assessor's Handbook 501. And talks about the comparative sales approach. So we use direct evidence of the market's opinion of value of a property, and value is estimated by comparing the subject property to similar properties that have recently sold. I'm just kind of summarizing this here for you. This approach is based on the principle of substitution. When we talk about the principle of substitution, what that means is when we have a prudent buyer, we know that they will pay no more for a property than the cost to buy an equally desirable substitute, assuming no costly delay. Okay. On to page 22. We have the replacement cost approach. So we define that as the cost to replace an existing property with a property of equivalent utility as of a particular date. And this concept is the most meaningful as it pertains to the principle of substitution. Page 23. We have a section on functional obsolescence. So just to summarize this, functional obsolescence is defined as the loss in value caused by the design of the property itself. When the capacity of a property to perform the function for which it was intended declines, functional obsolescence is present. And this can be caused by things like changes in the marketplace, design, materials, or technology. And even though the equipment or the property may still be usable, it becomes obsolete due to these changes. And that's something that we see a lot with supermarket equipment, like I said, with the refrigeration. So if we have a refrigerator that's 10 or 15 years old, it may still be usable, but there may have been different changes in the market. Like I said, it could be government regulations for efficiency or the refrigerants that are allowed to be used. But it affects the resale value of that equipment because the current owner can still use it for the function that they need to use it for. But if they try to sell that, the value is going to be affected. Okay, moving on to page 24. We have a section on external obsolescence, which is also known as economic obsolescence. And that is the loss in value resulting from adverse factors external to the property. Some examples of this include inflation, high interest rates, legislation, environment, demand, and competition. Okay. And below that, we have a section on the market method. So this is the market method of estimating depreciation. This method relies on market data, making adjustments for relevant property characteristics. It estimates total depreciation without requiring engineering economics calculations. The market method is the preferred method when reliable data are available because it captures all forms of depreciation, including functional and external obsolescence, as I mentioned earlier. So that's just a brief summary on some of the references that we relied on. And we can move on to Exhibit 3, which is our opinion of value. Now, this exhibit pertains only to the 2018 lien date. We have a separate exhibit for 2019 and how our opinion of value is calculated there. On Exhibit 3, page 1, these are the different sales that we were able to find for the 2016 calendar year. These are just the ones that we have. There are plenty others like this. This is actually from one provider of the sales data that we have. So you can see the name of the store that sold along with its location, sale date. We have the price that all of the equipment sold for. So we took the entire list of equipment that sold and we just summed it all up, divided that by the square footage to come up with a price per square foot. So this is our raw price per square foot before any adjustments were made. So you can see there's some of these stores that actually sold for pretty low values. We didn't consider those. The values were just too low. And that could happen for a variety of reasons, but mostly it happens because not all of the equipment was able to sell. So as we go through the sales documents that we have, you'll see that there may be some pieces of equipment that didn't sell. So for property tax purposes, we know that all equipment is it's accessible on the lien date. So we wanted to find the sales where they had the most equipment sold. We didn't want to make a huge adjustment. We didn't want to make an adjustment for the unsold equipment that was bigger than the equipment that sold itself. So we just tried to find the sales that were the most relevant to the property in question today. And those are the ones that are highlighted. So we have a Hagen, we have a Vons, which is another brand name for Safeway. We have the Walmart neighborhood market. It's not a typical Walmart store that's 100,000 square foot plus. This is Walmart's grocery store. They're usually between 20 to 30,000 square feet. We also have a Ralph's and a Fresh Market. And then these are the sales that we have for calendar year 2017. So we looked at the 2 years preceding the 2018 lien date. And there weren't quite as many sales for 2017, but we considered all the ones that we have. So it looks like we have 5 here, and then we have 6 for 2016. So we had a good number to choose from. So for 2017, we have some Fresh and Easy stores. We have a Whole Foods, actually a couple Whole Foods stores, and then a Kroger. On page 3, you can see our sales grid. So this is where we summarize the different stores that sold, and then the relevant characteristics of these properties. You see the sale date, the price, the age, and then the price per square foot that it's sold for. So on the right side, the right half of this grid, you can see the adjustments that we made. So things like the buyer's premium. Each one of these sales, it includes a buyer's premium. It could be anywhere between 15 to say 25%. It's just added on to the price that the buyers pay for the equipment. So for each of these, it looks like they're 18% for the buyer's premium. There's one that's at 20%. That was the Kroger down towards the bottom. So we adjusted upward for that. The next adjustment was for scrapped equipment. So each of these sales, it'll let us know if something wasn't sold. And typically when that happens, the equipment gets scrapped or just thrown away. So we made an adjustment upward for that. Equipment quality. So not every company has the same standards as far as equipment quality goes. Safeway, their standards are a little bit higher as far as the quality of the equipment that they use. And you can kind of tell by the brand names when you see the descriptions of the equipment that's sold versus the descriptions of the equipment that Safeway uses. So in the cases where the quality of the equipment was inferior, we made an upward adjustment. Store size, we also made an adjustment for that. We have economies of scale. So if there was a store that's much smaller, we would have to adjust upward. If there's a store that's bigger, we would adjust downward. Equipment removal. So for each of these sales, on the day of the sale, the buyer is required to remove the equipment at their own cost. So this is something that we factored in. We estimated the equipment removal cost to be about 20% based on the research that we've done. So we adjusted upward for the equipment removal. And then the final adjustment we have is, it says miscellaneous adjustment. So for this one, it's because there's some of these stores that don't provide all the same services that a Safeway store provides. So just for one example, we see the two Walmarts. Those are both in LA County. And with the Walmart neighborhood market, they didn't have things like a deli, a bakery, a seafood department. So that's a cost of equipment that wasn't included. So we adjusted upward for that. And then in the far right column, you can see our adjusted price per square foot. So on page 4, this is how we determine the installation cost that we have to include with our overall value. Because when we're talking about property taxes, we need to include not just the cost of the equipment itself, but also installation and sales tax. So we looked at the installation costs over the last 10 years or so with Safeway and Vons. So we got this information from the fixed assets, and those are the numbers that are reported on the property statement. And we just compared the cost of the equipment with the cost to install that equipment. And what we found was over this period, it kind of ranged between 20 to about 30% of the cost of the equipment went to installation. So for purposes of our evaluation, we just went with the upper limit of this, and we added 30% to the market value for installation costs. Okay, so this page 5 is just our summary. We've already seen these numbers. But one number that you haven't seen yet, it's in the middle of this grid. You can see RCN per square foot. So the RCN, that's the reproduction cost, and that's based on the reported costs to the county. So calculating the RCN, you take the reported costs, and then there's index factors that are provided by the Board of Equalization. And that gives you the reproduction cost new of everything in the store. So if we wanted to reproduce an exact replica of everything that's in the store, that's how much it would cost. And then you factor in depreciation on top of that. But the reason why that number is important, it's about $85 a square foot. It's important when we compare the replacement cost that Marshall and Swift recommends, which we'll see on the next page. So on page 6, this is a summary of all the different value calculations. So at the top, you'll see the assessor's cost approach. These are the different categories of equipment that are reported to the county on the property statement, along with the table that's used. And these tables are recommended by the CAA. We have the allocation to fixtures and personal property. You'll see the cost. Those are the overall costs that are reported. Then you have the allocations with the total value. Okay, so you've already seen these numbers. But below that, you can see the two value approaches that we considered. So the first one you see is the sales comparison approach. So under the sales comparison approach, you can see the age of the equipment, which is about 8 years. And we have the calculation for that on the next page. So for a store that's 8 years old, based on the market data that we have, we estimate the value to be about $12 a square foot. And that's the number that's directly below that. So on top of the $12 a square foot, we factor in sales tax and installation. And we have an overall total market value of about $16 a square foot. Okay. So then we take that and multiply it by the square footage, and that gives us an overall opinion of value of about 1.2 million. Okay, so then below that, you can see our Marshall and Swift approach. So these are the numbers that we got from what's recommended by Marshall and Swift. So Marshall and Swift recommends a range, actually. I believe it was about $30 to $50 a square foot. So we went with the upper limit of this range. It's $49.50 per square foot. Is what they recommend. And then we have to factor in a cost multiplier as well as a local multiplier. So the cost multiplier is to bring the cost current to the current lien date, because this recommendation that they made, they update it every couple of years. So for the 2018 lien date, their recommendation was a little bit out of date, so we had to adjust that cost upward by 4%. You can see that multiplier is 1.04. So then the local multiplier that they recommend is an adjustment of about 14%. So you see the 1.14. So we have a total replacement cost, all things considered, of about $59 a square foot. So based on Marshall and Swift's recommendation, you can replace an entire store full of equipment, excluding the land and improvements, just the equipment in the store. We can replace it brand new for $59 per square foot. Where if we look at the reproduction cost, it's based on the reported cost, it's about $85 a square foot. So based on that disparity, we think that there's an issue. So once we have the replacement costs from Marshall and Swift, we now need to depreciate it based on the age. So the depreciation factor that they recommend for equipment that's 8 years old is 74%. So we depreciate that, and we have an overall depreciated price per square foot of about $15. Multiply that by the square footage of the building, and we have a value of $1,182,927. So it's a little bit lower than what we found by using the market sales, but we believe that the sales data is relevant. So that's why we're basing our opinion of value on that. But you see the numbers are still fairly similar, and they're both substantially lower than the real value. So on the final page of this exhibit, this is how we calculated the RCN per square foot and our average age. So these are all the different categories that are reported to the county. And it kind of looks like the property statement. So under each category, we have the cost, and the cost corresponds to the year that it was acquired. And on the right side of this grid, you'll see a set of numbers. So we have age and index. The index number is the index that's recommended or is published by the Board of Equalization. So what this number is supposed to do is it's supposed to take a historical cost and make it current to the lien date. So that's why the top number you see on the index is just 1. So the costs that are a year old, you just index it by 1, and the cost is current. But if we go down a couple of years for equipment that's 15 years old, we have an index of 1.24. So whatever that cost was 15 years ago, we have to multiply it by 1.24, or we're indexing it up 24%, and that'll make the cost current. So this is how we calculate the RCN. or the reproduction cost of new. And the total RCN for this location is about 4.4 million. That's the number on the bottom. Okay, so then we take the RCN and we multiply each number by the age of that equipment. And this gives us a weighted average for the average age of this equipment. So we have our RCN times age down at the bottom. It's about 35 million, just a little bit less. So we take that number of 35 million and we divide it by the RCN, the 4.4 million. And then we end up with an average age of about 8 years. And it makes sense because if you look at where the majority of the cost is in store equipment, that's the second column of numbers right there. You can see the biggest acquisition year was 2009. So seeing that the average age is about 8 years makes sense just by looking at the numbers. So then below the age of 8 years or 7.92 years, we have our square footage. And then that's how we calculate our RCN per square foot. So take the RCN of 4.4 million divided by 52,000, and then we have our RCN per square foot. So again, looking at a reproduction cost approach, it will cost $85 a square foot, where Marshall & Swift recommends, they recommend $59 a square foot. Are there any questions about how these numbers were calculated?
Looking at board members, any questions? Okay, I don't see any questions.
Okay. We can move on to Exhibit 4. Okay, so Exhibit 4 will summarize the Board of Equalization and the CAA guidelines. Just going a little more depth on the history of it and how they apply today. So this is just the cover sheet from Assessor's Handbook 581. So these are the index factors that we saw in the previous exhibit. So these are the numbers that we multiply the historical cost by to get the cost current. Now, when the assessor does the cost approach, we rely on a trend factor. It's not just a percent good factor. So we have to take this index factor and we multiply it by the percent good factor and we get a blended trend factor. So these numbers you see here, there's a number that corresponds to each year of acquisition. Okay. And then moving on to the next page. These are the percent good factors. So let's just take, for example, the column that has the 12 at the top. So the 12, this will be a 12-year table, which is what we use for grocery store equipment. That's what's recommended by the CAA. So all these numbers that are under the 12, you see 93, so that's 93% good. You take the original acquisition cost, multiply it by 93%. That's supposed to tell you the value or the percent good. But we can't just leave it at 93. We have to also index it to make that cost current. So we take the 93 and we multiply it by the corresponding index factor. In this case, it's 1 because it's the most current year. So it would be 93% as the trend factor. And below that, you have 86. So it says that on the 12-year table, something that's 2 years old is 86% good. So you take that 86 and you multiply it by its index factor, which in this case is 103. So 86 times 1.03, that gives you the trend factor. And this is how the value is determined using the assessor's cost approach. And sometimes this works, but most of the time we want to take a deeper look at that because they use a 12-year table for a lot of different equipment categories. It's not just supermarket equipment. They use it for office equipment, warehouse equipment. We have a list later on in this exhibit, but not every industry will experience the same highs and lows at the same time. So we see this as an issue, just using a blanket 12-year table for all these different equipment categories. There may be some years where a 12-year table is accurate, for grocery store equipment, which is one of the reasons why we haven't requested the study that the assessor mentioned earlier. So we are able to request a study from the Board of Equalization where they can determine whether or not the recommendation is accurate. But we haven't done that. We're not required to do that. So like I said, there may be some years where this is accurate, but for these two lien dates, we believe that it's not. Okay, so moving on to page 4. This is an LTA from 1996, and this was what I mentioned earlier regarding policy 10. So I'll just summarize this. And in this LTA, it says that economic lives provided in what was previously known as policy and procedures number 10 and any subsequent revisions were based on the knowledge and experience of ASD's auditor appraisers, opinions of assessors and their staffs, and information from various industry sources. In most cases, they were not based on actual studies of the average service lives of any of the listed groups of equipment. Okay, so basically the guidelines that they had in place, it wasn't based on studies or market data. It was just based on experience and opinions. Later, it says, county assessors are not required to follow the internal guidelines issued for ASD staff. Internal guidelines do not have the authority of a property tax rule, letter to assessor, or assessor's handbook because they are not reviewed and approved by the elected Board of Equalization members. So strictly relying on the guidelines themselves is not evidence, and assessors are not required to follow these guidelines. Finally, it says ASD's internal guidelines are not to be cited as an authority in assessment appeals hearings. An assessment appeals case should be decided by applying the appropriate property tax statutes, regulations, court rulings, and sound appraisal practice to the pertinent information available for the situation in dispute. Okay, so like I said, this policy was withdrawn after 1996. And that's when the CAA stepped in and provided its own guidelines. Okay, so moving on to pages 5 through 9, which is what you see on the screen, we have an issue paper from 2008. This is from the Board of Equalization. And the purpose of this was to determine whether or not to include those same guidelines in the assessor's handbook. So basically, they were trying to bring back policy 10. So yeah, again, this is after CAA had already made its recommendation. And they're basically the same. Policy 10, the CAA, and the recommendation in this issue paper, they're all basically the same. As far as CAA's guidelines go, the Board of Equalization has not participated in that. It's just the assessors that have made the guidelines. Okay. So what this issue paper says, it says that the economic lives to be included in the assessor's handbook were to represent a starting point in determining fair market value. And they use that term starting point since, quote, it's impossible for board staff to conduct an in-depth lifing study on every category of property or equipment. And we don't disagree with that. We think that there has to be a starting point that's established, but to rely on that just dogmatically and say that these are the values, that's it. We don't agree with that. You know, if that was the case, there would be no purpose in filing an appeal and taking a deeper look at the value. So this issue paper also says that the data that would be contained in the assessor's handbook is only meant to be used as a guide. It uses the word guide. It says county assessors are required by law to determine the market value of the property. So we can make that request to the Board of Equalization to do some kind of study, but that's not the end all be all of it. You know, in the meantime, we can still file an appeal, and the assessors are required by law to determine the value of the property. Okay, so here on page 8, can you guys see the cursor on my mouse?
Yeah, we can see that.
Okay, so right here, where I'm kind of circling around with my cursor, this is where it says that the data in Assessor's Handbook is intended as a guide. It's a guide, not a prescription. Okay, so just once again, only a portion of these recommended lives that were proposed to be in Assessor's Handbook were the result of an in-depth lifing study. And like I said, those situations, or in those situations, that category of equipment gets its own table. So the remaining economic lives were developed from auditor appraiser knowledge, information gathered from different counties, and the results of assessment appeals hearings. And that's what you can see here down at the bottom. And that's actually one of the cons that they considered for this approach. Okay, so moving on to page 10. This is an LTA, which is a follow-up to what we just saw a second ago. And this is the proposed economic lives that would be included in the Assessor's Handbook. And they're asking for input from interested parties as to what they thought about this proposal. Okay, so you see highlighted right here, it says the data contained in the handbook are intended as a guide, and they emphasize guide, for county assessors in the mass appraisal of personal property and equipment. County assessors are required by law to determine the market value of property. If data obtained by a county assessor, whether through a study conducted by the assessor staff or by information submitted to the county assessor by the taxpayer, indicates a conclusion other than that in AH 581, the county assessor should base his or her value conclusion on the pertinent, verifiable market data available. So these are the different categories of equipment and the economic lives that they were recommending for Assessor's Handbook. On page 12, let's see, grocery stores. We're recommending a 12-year life. Okay. Next, we can move on to some of the input that they actually got from that LTA. Like I said, they were asking for input from interested parties. So we have one example here. Looks like it's somebody from Nestle. And he says, all food processing machinery and equipment should not get a 15-year life. Even though according to California, engineering is considered taxable, I can't sell the engineering costs associated with my equipment. Another issue I have is how were these tables established? Is there a study that was conducted or something that would validate the lives established? Now, these all come from emails and letters that were submitted, and it's all public information that you can get from the Board of Equalization's website. So next, we have an email on page 18 where it says, having the California Assessors Association dictate the direction of life tables could create self-prophesying positions among some assessor personnel or even counties. And this is something that we agree with. If there's a guideline that's established, say for example, we have the 12-year guideline for grocery store equipment, it creates self-prophesying positions like this email suggests. There's always ways that you can manipulate the numbers to kind of back into that to try to support that guideline. So we would actually want to see if they had some kind of table established, we'd want to see an actual study of this equipment specifically. On page 19, we have another letter. This time it's not an email. We actually have a letter that was submitted where it says, our industry opposes the inclusion of economic lives for equipment categories in Assessor's Handbook because there does not appear to be any rationale for the economic years chosen. So again, this person has an issue with it as well. There's plenty of other letters like this. We have another one here. And then we actually have a follow-up to that original LTA. It was actually just a couple months later. So they took a couple months to get all the input that they could. And on this LTA, it says right here highlighted, as a result of input from interested parties, economic lives will not be included in Assessor's Handbook 581. Interested parties indicated that a wholesale adoption of lives should not be undertaken by the board. So the purpose of introducing this information is just to show that the Board of Equalization has not taken a position on the 12-year life that's recommended. This recommendation comes from the CAA, which is a professional organization for the assessors in the 58 counties of the state. So to finish off this exhibit, we have a couple of examples of the CAA's recommendations. So here we have the recommendation from the year 2000. This is for lien date 1/1/2000. And this, in the introduction, it says, this paper is a result of work by the CAA Business Chiefs Association, having met to arrive at a uniform set of equipment index, percent good, and valuation factors. These tables are recommended for use by all California Assessors Association members in order to promote uniformity in the assessment of business property. On the next page. If an assessor has property or industry-specific appraisal data that in the assessor's opinion will produce a more precise appraisal of the subject property, then it is recommended that the assessor apply the more precise data. So the assessors are not bound by these guidelines. They can change the value however they wish, as long as it's within the bounds of the law. And that would actually be the definition of equalization. So on the following pages, we have the recommendations as of 1/1/2000. So we have the different categories and then the recommended economic life in years. So here on page 31, you can see grocery stores. They did once have it at a 15-year life. Now it's on a 12. But the purpose of including these guidelines is because here we have 2018. We wanted to show that over this period from 2000 to 2018, not much has changed as far as the recommendations go. So for grocery stores, they did change it from a 15 to a 12, but that's really the most substantial change that we see as far as the life tables go. And we've had a lot of things happen economically that would affect the value of these different equipment categories. So it just makes us question exactly where these recommendations come from. Is there any kind of market data that they considered? And in our opinion, there hasn't been, because we would see much more drastic changes as far as the lives that are recommended. But also, for 2018, we have different categories that are highlighted. And the ones that are highlighted are all categories that also receive a 12-year life, like grocery stores. So the page you see on right here on page 36, we can see the aerospace industry, apparel manufacturing, beauty salons, those all get a 12-year life. 37, we have blueprinting, car washes, construction, dentists, pharmaceuticals, grocery stores, hospitals. All of these equipment categories are all unique. They really don't have anything to do with each other, and they're all going to experience different highs and different lows in the economy. You know, if we look at the most recent downturn from starting in like 2007, 2008, there were different industries that were hit really hard, and there were other industries that weren't. But we don't believe that was actually taken into consideration for these recommendations. So just applying a 12-year life, we believe it doesn't always give us an accurate value. And that's why we wanted to look at the sales of specific grocery store equipment. So again, we see some more categories on here: print shop, office furniture, medical offices, machine shops. These all get a 12-year life. And we see an issue with that. move on to Exhibit 5. These are the numbers that are recommended by Marshall and Swift. This is what I had kind of summarized, I believe it was in Exhibit 3, where we have our secondary approach for how we estimated market value. So on page 1 of this exhibit, this is a short exhibit. On page 1, highlighted on the bottom of the page, bottom right corner, it says, complete equipment for a typical supermarket ready to open for business costs $29.75 to $49.50 per square foot of gross market area. So like I mentioned before, just for the sake of being conservative, we went with the upper end of this range. We know that Safeway, they typically use higher end equipment. They maintain it the best they can, and then they replace it in order to keep up with those standards. So we just went with the higher, or the upper end, the upper limit of this recommendation. So that's the raw number, the $49.50 per square foot. So you can see I added that note above that in red. It says adjusted price per square foot of $59. So we adjusted it upward by about $10 a square foot. And you'll see where those adjustments come from in the following pages. So on page 2, these are the life expectancy guidelines that Marshall and Swift recommends. So they don't have guidelines specifically for grocery stores or supermarkets, but they have one just for general retail. And they recommend a range of 7 to 11 years. And it doesn't actually give an explanation of how they apply this range, but we just went with the number in the middle of 9 years. And this was an issue in a couple of different ways, but the biggest thing that we saw with this was that the CAA has stated in their guidelines that they print or that they publish that they rely on Marshall and Swift. And then in the Board of Equalization issue paper, they also said that they rely on Marshall and Swift. So we see an issue here where if they rely on Marshall and Swift, why is it that they recommend a 12-year life when at most Marshall and Swift recommends an 11-year life? But the way that we applied this was we just kind of made the assumption that the items that are more high-tech in nature, probably closer to the lower end of the range of the 7 years, and the things that are a little more general, like say, like a clothing retail, that would be in the upper end. There's not a whole lot of advances or a lot of changes in technology as far as that goes. So considering the fact that we have the bulk of our costs with refrigeration and the freezers, we went with a 9-year life. On page 3, we have the depreciation factors that they recommend. So we have the 9-year column boxed in red, and that's the depreciation factor that we used for this valuation. So I believe it was 8 years old, this store. So for 8 years old, we see a factor of 74. So we depreciated that adjusted price per square foot by 74%. Now, this is where we get our current cost multiplier. So this takes the historical cost and it makes it current for the lien date question. Okay, so there's a couple lines that are highlighted. We have refrigeration and then just general stores. So these are the cost indexes for specific dates. So the first one that you see is for January of 2018, right here. And then we have April of 2016. Yeah, April of 2016. So April 2016 is when the recommendation was published. So that will be the recommendation that they made. It was current as of April 2016. So we take these cost indexes, we multiply the current lien date by the published date. And that gives us our cost multiplier. So the reason why we have refrigeration and store both highlighted is because those are the two closest categories for a Safeway store. And both numbers resulted in a current cost multiplier of 1.04. So we take that 4950 and we multiply it by the 1.04 and it makes that cost. Now on page 5, this is where we have our local multipliers. So they have a section for each state, and right here we have the section for California. For major cities, they have the cities listed with their own specific multipliers, but then they also have it by county as well. So you see we have the line highlighted here for this location, and considering all of those multipliers, we average it out, and we have a local multiplier for our replacement cost of 1.14. So it's pretty basic and straightforward. There's only 2 adjustments that we had to make to the recommendation, but it's pretty consistent with what the market tells us this equipment is worth.
Hey, Brent, sorry, this is Supervisor Kirk. Can you go back to the top of this PDF of your slide? The first page.
What page?
The first page, the equipment costs. I just want to clarify that bottom $59. You're saying that that's a $59 cost per square foot because of the installation?
No. So that
clarify?
$59 is just for Marshall and Swift. So you can see the note that they make right below where it says $59.
Yeah.
It says complete equipment for a typical supermarket ready to open for business. And then they give that range about $30 to $50 a square foot. So we take the $49.50 and we multiply it by the current cost multiplier just to account for things like inflation.
Okay, so it's the inflation cost that you got there from 2016 to today's current date. The 49 is now that 59. Is that correct? Is that how I'm hearing it?
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand what you were saying.
So the 59 is today's cost since this report was done in 2016. That's what you're saying?
Yeah, today's cost as well as the location specific numbers.
Thank you.
So if we go back to page 5, you see they have different multipliers for different locations throughout the state. So like let's just say, for example, we have Los Angeles. You see the multipliers there are a little bit higher. There's assuming that because of that location, it'll be more expensive to rebuild something there. Now, were there any other questions about that? No more questions?
I don't see any more questions.
Okay. Would it be okay if we just took a 5-minute break and then come back?
That's a good idea. So we'll take a 5-minute break. There we go. Okay, so we'll reconvene the meeting of the Tuolumne County Board of Equalization. Brent, I'm sorry. Are you with us, Sherry? Okay, so we'll wait a couple of minutes to see if we can get 2 more supervisors to join us.
Low.
Okay, so we got Sherry. All right. So we'll reconvene the meeting of the Tuolumne County Board of Equalization. I believe we're on exhibit. Brent, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. And I think you're on exhibit 6, right?
Yes. Exhibit
Okay.
six.
Go ahead
So
and continue.
you guys should be able to see that on the screen. Okay. So do you guys see exhibit 6 on the screen?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. So this here is a letter that we have from the Board of Equalization. And it's important because it gives a little bit of background on the types of sales that we're using. So when we consider market sales for this type of equipment, the typical way that it sells is through auction. And when you hear the word auction, you might think that it's not a market transaction. You might think it's a distress sale, forced sale, could be from a bankruptcy or something like that. But based on everybody that I've talked to, I've talked to people at Safeway, from people from competitive companies or competing companies. I've talked to people that manufacture the equipment, people that sell used equipment, and they've all told me that this is the typical way that this type of property is sold. So this letter that we have, it talks about the relevance of auction information as far as fair market value is concerned. So the first page of this letter is actually a letter from our company to the Board of Equalization asking for some clarification. And on this letter, it says, recently we attended a Society of Auditor Appraisers meeting in Concord, California. Mark Buckley from your office gave a very good lecture in one of the workshops I attended. During this lecture, it was my understanding that the SBE is not opposed to using auction data to help arrive at a proper market value. We'd appreciate having some additional data on how and when this type of data would be used. So on page 2, we have the Board of Equalization's response. And you can see the highlighting at the bottom of page 2 and the top of page 3, where it says auctions due to forced sales such as a bankruptcy or foreclosure would generally not be considered reliable indicators of fair market value. However, in some circumstances, auction sales could meet the market value conditions. The appraiser should consider if the transaction was typical of existing market and economic conditions. Some types of property typically transfer through the auction process, and that's the case with supermarket equipment. It's just what it is. It's the way that it's sold. When we have used equipment, it is bought and sold at auction. So the information that we have pertaining to the sales, they all come from auctions. We have them from 2016 and 17, and those are the sales that pertain to the 18 lien date. And we also have some more from 2018 that pertain to the 19 lien date. So we can start with exhibit 7. This is the sale. Oh man, clicked on something. Okay. So this is a sale of a Hagen store in Los Angeles. You can see the information for the sale here. So former Hagen supermarket in Los Angeles. And this sale is January 7th, 2016. And I'll just go through some examples of the equipment and just kind of what these sales consist of. Okay, so you'll see some of the lower cost items on page 4. We have some hand sanitizer dispensers, some of the shopping baskets. We'll look at this page specifically, okay, page 5. So on the right side, you can see what each of these items sold for. You see who they sold to. Okay, so just for example, we'll look at this one here on the top. It says that this locker, or this set of lockers, sold for $150. You see it shows who it sold to. Now that's somebody's username. So in this case, somebody logged into the website and they bought this equipment online. Now, one of the reasons why we believe that these sales are relevant is because their audience is so broad. It's not just people that are buying this equipment locally, where depending on where you are, you may get only 10 people that are bidding on this equipment. But these auctions appeal to a worldwide audience. Now, the gentleman that I've worked with that sold Safeway's equipment, he said that in his experience in the last 20 years, he has shipped equipment to every continent on Earth. So it does reach a broad audience. So down below, you can see this, the third item here, some tables. This one shows that it's sold on site. So that was actually somebody that was there in person that bought the equipment. So as you can see, it's not just people that are there. And like I said, depending on where the sale takes place, there may be a couple dozen people, there may be a few hundred people. And then you also have the people that are bidding online. So it does reach a big audience. And then these sales, they're also advertised well in advance. It's typically a month or two in advance that everybody knows about these sales. I'm not even interested in buying this equipment. I get information on the sales myself. So I'm still following these sales all the time. They send out emails, send out several emails for each sale. Like I said, it's usually a couple months in advance. Sometimes they send out flyers in the mail, but they make sure that the word gets out. They want to sell this equipment. These companies, they get paid typically on a commission basis. So the higher the price they get for this equipment, the better it is for them too. So they're motivated and they have an incentive to try to get the highest price possible. So we have some equipment here, the more substantial pieces where it actually gives us the age. It'll tell us the manufacturer year. So in this case, you can see here's a Hussmann 12-foot case. This one was built in 2008, or I'm sorry, manufactured in 2008. So this is how we were able to estimate the average age of each of these locations. And that will be another reason why we may have not included some of those other locations that you saw on our list. We may not have been able to determine how old that equipment was, or there were some cases where the equipment was just too old and it wasn't comparable. So some of those locations, depending on where they were, they may have been 20 or 25 years old. And in that case, the adjustment would just be too big to try to make it comparable to the subject property. So we wouldn't have used that. So here on page 15, we can see some more cases, some of these display cases. We highlighted the manufacturer year. So these are all from 2008. So this sale was in 2016. So this equipment is about 8 years old at the time of this sale. You see here's some more Hussmann cases. And Hussmann is a manufacturer that Safeway typically uses too. So these cases also about 8 years old. Yeah, this exhibit is 89 pages long. So rather than being redundant, I just wanted to kind of give you guys some examples. We have some more here. Here's a 2011. We have some more from 2008. And then we have some older ones too, 1997. So it kind of ranges. But at the end of the exhibit, we just have the lease listing. So once this closed down, we wanted to verify the square footage so we can estimate our price per square foot. So on the site plan, this store became a Sprouts, which is what you see right here. And that's where we get the square footage from. So for the Sprouts, it's about 52,000 square feet. Exhibit 8. We have another location. This is 2016, and this one is in Simi Valley, which is in Ventura County, so a little bit south from you. This one, it was a Vons that became a Hagen store. So Vons is the Southern California brand name for Safeway. I'll just go over another couple examples. So this equipment, or this store, since it used to be a Vons store, I would assume that most of it fits the standards that a Safeway or Vons store tries to adhere by. You can see also here's a good example. On page 14, you can see these 4 items, actually 5 items on the bottom. It says passed. So when we see that note where it says passed, that means that the equipment didn't sell. So that would be one of the other adjustments that we had to make in our grid. Because like I said, we want to assume that all the equipment is accessible on the lien date. So we want to make sure that there's some kind of value that's attributed for the overall market value for what this store sold for. So for this one, these items, they're not major pieces of equipment, but we would still make some kind of adjustment for that. And this exhibit, it's 100 pages long, so there's quite a bit of equipment. You can see there's close to 600 items on here. So we won't go through all of them, but you can see some of them sold, most of them sold, some of them didn't sell. So we would make an adjustment upward to account for those that didn't sell. Okay, so now exhibit 9. We have the Walmart Neighborhood Market, and this is in Hawaiian Gardens, which is Los Angeles County. And we actually have 2 examples of Walmart sales. This one is May 11th of 2016. The interesting thing about the Walmart sales is that these stores were fairly new when they sold. So on page 6, we have some refrigeration cases. These are all 2013 cases. So since the sale took place in 2016, these are only 3 years old. We have some more down below. These are all 2013 as well. So this is a fairly new store. So we thought that it was a good one to use when we're doing the comparable sales approach. There's not a whole lot of adjustment for age that we would have to make. You can see the sale, it also went to people that were on site as well as people that bid online. You can see looks like the top 4 of them were sold on site. And we have the one below that was sold to somebody online. Another one here at the very bottom says wooden display. This one says passed. So this item was not sold. Okay. So on page 23, this is how we verified the square footage of the store. So right here, we have a square footage of 43,000 roughly. Okay, here we have another Walmart store. This one is in downtown LA. This was June of 2016. And same as the last one, it's fairly new. These check stands are from 2013. You see they sold for about $150 each, when originally they're much more than that, usually a couple thousand. So after 3 years, they depreciated quite a bit. So here we have another refrigeration case, 2013. Some more 2012. So these ones were just a little bit older. These are 4 years old. So the store is fairly new also. So we thought that it was a good comparable sale. All these from 2012, you can see. And here's a news release about this store opening. This is from September of 2013. Talks about the grand opening of Walmart Neighborhood Market in downtown LA on Cesar Chavez Avenue. Opened September 13th, 2013. Shows that it's a 34,000 square foot store. And then just 3 years later, it closed. Next exhibit, also from 2016. For a Ralph store in Oceanside, which is in San Diego County. So I've actually been to this store. It's a little bit older, or it was a little bit older. And you can see that in the sale prices for the equipment, as well as the items that didn't sell. Sometimes an item is just too old and obsolete that nobody wants it. You can see here, these aren't supermarket items. These are more just general office equipment, but these didn't sell. But that's something that we would account for. So here's the lease listing for the now vacant store, 45,000 square foot store. So this is pretty comparable to a typical Safeway or Vaughn store, about 45,000 square feet. Some of them are a little bit bigger. This one, the subject property is 50,000 square feet. So I can go ahead and just skip to a couple of examples from the 17 calendar year. So that would be exhibit 13. So this is for a fresh and easy store. So the thing about fresh and easy is these stores are substantially smaller, typically. They're usually about 15 to 20,000 square feet, sometimes a little bit smaller. And the quality of equipment is not quite as high as what you would see in a typical Safeway store. So a couple of things we adjusted for on the fresh and easies would be the store size. And we also adjusted for equipment quality and the fact that everything in the store is prepackaged. So they don't have some of the departments that a Safeway store would have, like a deli, seafood, bakery, things like that. So we'd have to adjust upward for that equipment that's not included. But these stores are fairly new. So these checkout stands year 2007, and this sale was from 2017. So 10-year-old equipment there. We have some more here from 2010, so 7 years old. You can see the manufacturer on these, Kaiser Warren. In our opinion, and also in speaking with other people in the industry, the Kaiser Warren equipment is not quite as good as, say, the Hussman equipment that Safeway would use. So we would adjust upward the raw price per square foot to account for equipment quality. You see, most of this equipment is from 2010, so about 7 years old at the time of the sale. You can see there's the lease listing for this location, so it's quite a bit smaller than a normal Safeway store. This one's about 14,000 square feet, as I mentioned before. Okay. So if I go through all of these sales, it'll be a little redundant. I don't want to waste anybody's time just going over the same thing over and over again. So I can just go over some of the ones that are a little bit more relevant, I guess. You could take the rest of these back as reference. But here we have a Whole Food store in Encinitas, which is down in San Diego County, and this would be exhibit 17. So we think that the Whole Foods sales that we have are good sales because the equipment is similar. The store setup is fairly similar. They're usually pretty close in size. We would consider it an upper tier store, like a Safeway store. So it's a good comparable for purposes of this valuation. So this sale was from June of 2017. So this applies to the 2018 lien date. So we have some general equipment on page 4, just your typical grocery store shelving. Okay, so on page 9, we see our first piece of refrigeration equipment. This is from 2011. So at the time of the sale, it's 6 years old, and you can see that it was not sold. So even though it's fairly new, for some reason, it didn't sell. Could be for a variety of reasons. Maybe it was too deteriorated physically, possibly because it may have used a type of refrigerant that the buyers didn't want, but for whatever reason, even though it's fairly new. So we have some more refrigeration on 19. Okay. So again, we have another one from 2011, and it did not sell. We have some more from 2011 and 2001. Those actually did sell. We can move along to page 26. And we have some more. So this store was also fairly new, about 6 years old. There's some of the equipment that was newer that sold and some of the newer equipment that didn't sell. But that's something that we accounted for in our adjustment grid. We have some more. Page 27, 2011, 2012. And if we move along to page 48, this is the lease listing. So the store, about 25,000 square feet, so a little bit smaller than a Safeway store, but that's something that we would account for in our overall value. Okay. So you can see where we got our sales information from. Next, I can get into some of the market data, the other market data that we relied on, the things that affect the value of the equipment, the things that these buyers consider when they actually buy this equipment. So, let's see what number this exhibit is. Exhibit 18. We have a set of different articles and publications that we've collected over the years. It's about 70 pages long, but I'll just go over some of the ones that we think are a little bit more pertinent. So starting on page 1, we have an article from a man named Dominic A. Piazza, who is a certified machinery and equipment appraiser. And this article is from April of 2019. And he talks about something called the remaining obsolescence factor. You can see it says ROF for short. It says that it is measured by taking the difference between the cost indicator of value and the value obtained through the use of the sales comparison approach. And this gives us a market-derived obsolescence factor. That's why we used the approach that we did. And we think that he agrees with us. When you have the cost indicator of value, that's when you get the assessor's value. And then when you use the sales comparison approach, which is what we've used, there's going to be a difference between the two. And that's the factor that he's talking about. That one factor, that accounts for all forms of obsolescence. So he also says that the two biggest technological influences on the remaining obsolescence factor are the internet and computerized controllers. These factors force equipment values to be reconciled to the market whenever possible. So the internet is a huge factor on the value of this equipment. So if you think about internet sales in the sense of selling the equipment itself, they can reach a much broader audience now selling this equipment by auction. So that'll affect the value, the final value of the equipment, but then also considering the internet for consumers buying groceries online. Depending on what source you look at, I would say most sources say that now it's about 25% of all groceries are purchased online, and that number is only getting higher. So other things that factor into the equipment obsolescence that this article talks about would be a lack of services. So when you buy equipment new, you get things like warranties, parts, or sometimes training on how to use the equipment. But when you buy the equipment used, you don't get those services. And that's something that you have to factor into the market value as well. And based on this article, in his opinion, he says that when equipment goes from the status of new to used, there's an immediate 50% drop in value. They just kind of use that as a rule of thumb. And he says that needs to be accounted for when using the cost approach, and that's not accounted for just by using the trend factors that are recommended. You can see here where he talks about the depreciation rule of thumb, and that's the 50% rule that I just mentioned. So he says rule of thumb for the cost of used equipment in the market was 50% of new. Okay. Excuse me. So on page 5, we have a CNN article from 2018, and this article talks about the Amazon Go stores that I talked about earlier. With the Amazon Go stores, they have no cashiers, no cash registers, and they don't even have a self-service checkout. So checkout stands are completely obsolete with these stores. Amazon bills your credit card on the way out of the store. So you have an app on your phone. It provides you a receipt. It tells you what you paid, and it can even tell you how long you spent in the store. And the way they do this is they have a highly automated system that it tracks everything you're doing in the store. So they have cameras that can see exactly what you pick up off the rack or off the shelf. They can scan the barcode from the camera. It's pretty amazing technology. The display shelves, they even have scales integrated into them. So it knows when something is picked up and when something is put back. And all of this, it not only helps the consumer, but it also tracks the inventory in real time. So they're able to replenish the shelves just based on the information that's gathered from their system. And based on this article, experts say that this type of store will be the norm in the near future. So on page 12, we have the 2017 year in review from the Food Marketing Institute. And a couple points to take away from this. It says that grocery store or grocery shopping will reach digital maturity and saturation faster than other industries. We already see that it's highly digital as far as people buying their groceries online. Center store categories are already moving online, and this trend is expected to continue. Younger shoppers are more engaged in technology, and they'll help speed up this transition. The younger shoppers are more likely to shop either on their phone or on the computer. It says that retailers will be forced to fundamentally reconfigure the layout and role of brick and mortar stores to meet the changing trends. So when you have your physical locations, if you have 25% less foot traffic, as some of these articles indicate, it makes the store a little bit less relevant, more obsolete. So they're faced with these difficult questions about whether to keep the store open or to try to downsize somehow and maybe reallocate that space in the store for something else. So we have another study from 2016. This is on page 22. And the study goes from page 22 to 29. And just to kind of summarize, it says that today's shoppers are looking for new solutions for the way that they shop. And it says that this rate of change is exponential, not linear, which is something that I kind of alluded to earlier. It says this is due to technology, shifting consumer preferences, and a more networked population. It says that consumer preference is moving away from the traditional large footprint grocery store. So not that long ago, you would see most grocery stores 50,000 square feet and bigger, some even 80 or 90,000 square feet. But your typical store nowadays, something that's built brand new, like say an Aldi, for example. They're a lot smaller. They're 20, 25,000 square feet. So there's less equipment that they need to furnish the store with. In this article, like I mentioned before, it says right here, the study revealed that over 67% of respondents already use the internet for grocery shopping research, and 25% are already ordering grocery products online. So what this says is stores, like I said, they have oversized real estate now, and they have different overhead implications because of that. So it's forced these retailers to repurpose the space for goods that are no longer in demand. So in the areas that they may have had some kind of display, whether it's dry goods or whether it's frozen or refrigerated goods, they've repurposed that into seating areas, or you might see a Starbucks or other dining options. They may have cooking demonstrations, but they've had to repurpose that. It's no longer a retail space anymore. Moving to page 36, we have an article pertaining to energy efficiency. And this article is from 2014, but it summarizes the changes that we've seen in energy efficiency standards. So at the top of the page, it says the Energy Department today rolled out new energy efficiency standards to make commercial refrigeration equipment in grocery and convenience stores about 30% more efficient, providing another bump for President Obama's climate action plan. Okay, and then below that, it says the new commercial refrigeration rules update standards from 2009 and will save businesses up to $11.7 billion. The rules will take effect in 2017. So they had one set of rules or one set of standards from 2009, and they had another set of standards taking effect in 2017. So 8 years later. So if equipment becomes obsolete after 8 years, this doesn't work with a 12-year table. If we're using a 12-year table to value this equipment, we would think that the equipment holds its value for at least 12 years. But based on these new standards for refrigeration, it's much lower than the 12 years.
Quick question.
Yes.
So when do you have to implement those standards? Is it at the point when it is sold, or based on the time the standard is implemented? So in other words, when would you have to replace your equipment?
I'm sorry, that was really muffled. I couldn't understand what you were saying.
So the question was, given these standards, when would you have to replace the equipment?
So the equipment doesn't have to be replaced. The older models that use the older refrigerants or may have an outdated configuration, whatever is outdated, it becomes grandfathered in, and you can still use it. But it'll affect the resale value, or it'll affect the market value of the equipment. If somebody else wants to use it, they may have to retrofit it so that they can use the newer refrigerants, or the refrigerants that are now allowed. So it doesn't mean that you can't use it. It affects the value because it's something that's no longer adheres to the regulations.
Right now, so thank you. It's at the point of sale.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
It's at the point of sale of the equipment. It would have to be upgraded. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I can't understand.
So it would be at the point of sale where
Right. Well, that's when you would
cost
recognize.
would be diminished,
That's when
or
you would,
that sale price would be diminished.
Yeah, that's when you would realize the difference in the market value. But if somebody wanted to sell it as of now, whatever obsolescence is present, it's still present. You can't quantify it until you sell it. We have another article. It goes from pages 37 to 39. Here on page 38, you see the timeline of the different energy efficiency standards. These are all federal standards. California has its own set of standards that are a little bit more strict than these. But we see that the first federal standard was effective in 2010. The second standard was effective in 2012, so it's just a couple of years. Then the third standard was effective in 2017, so just 5 years later. And then the updated standard was actually due this year, expected to take effect in 2023. So we see these new standards changing every 2 to 6 years or so. Okay, moving on to page 40. We have an article that includes a graph. Okay, now on this graph, we have the orange dotted line, and that is the energy usage based on the 2003 California standard. And then below that, we have a gray dotted line, which shows the energy usage based on the 2010 national standard. So 7 years later, and we can see that the standard had an effect. The energy consumption went down. And then we have the black solid line, which is the 2017 national standard. So again, consumption went down, which we think is a good thing. Then you can see the blue dots that are below the national standard. And that's the energy usage for the current models. And this is current as of March 2017. So these companies, they're not only meeting the government standards, but they're exceeding the standards as well. And they're competing with each other. They're trying to make their equipment more appealing to the buyers than their competitors' equipment. So since not only the government is creating new standards, but the industry is creating new standards for itself, and that's making the older equipment more obsolete, or obsolete quicker than what the 12-year life would indicate. Because this isn't something that we see in every industry. You know, I showed you earlier the different industries that use a 12-year table. You're not seeing this kind of competition in every industry. Okay, so we have an article here on page 42 from Hill Phoenix, which is a manufacturer of refrigeration equipment. And on page 43, they summarize how they're meeting these energy efficiency standards. They're doing things like upgrading the LED lights, which are more energy efficient. They're increasing the coil efficiency and improving fan motor efficiency. They may be adding occupancy sensors to operate the lights. And what this means by making these changes is that certain case models that they have will change and some disappear. So they have different model numbers throughout their product line. And those model numbers, they don't change from year to year. You think about cars. You know, you have the model name of a car, and that model doesn't change. The name stays the same, but they might have different features on the car. It's the same thing with these refrigeration cases. So when they have to make these changes to meet new energy efficiency standards, it means that some of those disappear. And when that happens, they may not have people that can service the older equipment. They may not have parts for the older equipment, and that affects the value. If somebody wants to buy this equipment, but they know that there's no parts available, there's no repairmen available, they're not going to pay as much for it. Okay, so the last article that I'll go over, it's an article from 2012, just talks a little more about refrigeration maintenance. So it says that there's a special emphasis that's put on this equipment category, and they do this for the sake of customers, cost, and regulations. So businesses, they make a concerted effort to make operations and equipment more energy efficient. Based on this article, It says that one study from the Department of Energy has found that 50% of a store's energy costs come from refrigeration alone. So because of this, it leads companies to invest more heavily in these efficient systems. So if a new system comes out that's more efficient 5 years later, they may have to make that investment. If it's 10 years later, they'll have to make the investment. So again, this is something that we see as having an impact on the value of this equipment. And then finally, we have a collection of letters that we've received. Like I said, I've been working with people that buy and sell equipment, people that are in the grocery store industry, people at Safeway and Vons and their competitors. And I've talked to people that work for the manufacturers as well. So that's where these letters come from. It's kind of used in lieu of their appearance to testify at the hearing. So I just wanted to go over a couple of them. So first, we have a letter from Cornerstone Equipment Management. And this is actually the company that sells all of Safeway's used equipment. There's a couple of lines that I've highlighted that I think are something that I just want to touch on.
Oh, no, I'm just looking at
This letter is from Jerry Evans. He's the CEO of the company. And he says, when a store is scheduled for closure, we are contacted by the customer well in advance in order to schedule a visit to the location. During our visit, we conduct a physical inventory of the equipment available for sale, compare the inventory to fixed asset records for any discrepancies, and make a determination as to whether conducting an auction will be cost effective. There are instances where our evaluation determines that the store's equipment is not suitable for sale through the auction process. This can occur because the equipment is physically deteriorated, obsolete, or has little to no public demand. Our evaluation may determine that individual items or even an entire store is not suitable for sale. So when you think about an auction, like I said, you may think that it's a distressed sale or they're forced to make the sale, but sometimes the sale doesn't even occur because they don't think that it's cost effective, because there are costs involved. In the examples that I gave earlier, the cost was on the buyer to remove the equipment, but there are some of these auctions, like the ones that Cornerstone does, where they will remove the equipment and that cost gets passed on to the seller. So just the different costs involved, the cost of advertising, all things considered, it may not be worth it to conduct an auction.
Hey, Buzz Kirk, this is Counselor Kirk, or Supervisor Kirk, sorry, my other title. What PDF are you on? Or exhibit? I lost track of you.
I'm sorry, what was that?
What exhibit are you on?
This is exhibit 19.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I don't think I mentioned that. Okay, he goes on to say, selling supermarket equipment by auction is the generally accepted method for selling this type of equipment, and there are several reasons for this. For one, the buyers want to see the equipment is functioning properly. If the equipment is removed and sent to an offsite warehouse, the buyers are unable to have that benefit. Additionally, deinstallation and transportation to a warehouse are not cost effective and may prevent the equipment from ever being sold. Even if the equipment is refurbished and sold from our warehouse, it will typically sit there for up to a year or longer before it is ever sold. Second, it is widely accepted that selling supermarket equipment by auction yields fair market value. As I mentioned, Cornerstone is paid a commission based on the sale price, so we are incentivized to maximize that sale price as much as possible. So he goes on to say some of the factors that affect the resale value of supermarket equipment include age, condition, regulatory compliance, remaining useful life, new technology, and supply. Due to the constant state of flux in refrigeration equipment, resale value today is substantially lower than it was 15 to 20 years ago. This comes as a result of new standards pertaining to allowable refrigerants, efficiency, and safety standards. So then finally, in the last paragraph, he says, It is my understanding that supermarket equipment is valued by the assessor's office using a 12-year economic life. While the equipment may be able to physically last that long, it does not hold the value indicated by the use of the corresponding trend factors. After about 10 years of use, this equipment has minimal value on the open market. Where after 10 years on a 12-year table, I believe that the equipment is still valued at about 65% of its historical acquisition cost. We can move on to pages 3 and 4. I have a letter from, his name is John Harrer, who is the property tax manager for Publix supermarkets. So I had the chance to meet this gentleman at a property tax event that I attended, and I asked him if he would be willing to write a letter for our hearings. And he wrote this letter at the end of 2018, so just a couple years ago. And he says, the biggest difference between using an economic life table and calculating value is the point in time at which the value changes. Now, I just need to mention that he's actually located in the Orlando area, but they do things fairly similar to how we do it in California. So he says the majority of the economic life tables in Florida have a floor of 20%, which is grossly overstated the longer an asset stays in service. So what this means is that when we look at the trend factors, there comes a point where the factors don't get any lower and we reach a floor. So on a 12-year table, I believe the floor is around 12 or 13%. So once it reaches that minimum, it doesn't matter how old the equipment is, it will always be valued at that same minimum. So it could be 15 years old or it could be 20 or 25 years old. It won't receive any more depreciation benefit. So the longer that something stays in service, as he mentions, the bigger that becomes, or the more that becomes an issue. He goes on to say, any asset can last longer than its expected average economic life, but has little to no value after a number of years. The depreciation tables with a floor do not take that into consideration in the actual value of the assets. Next paragraph, he says, in the first 6 months of 2017, 378 display cases were sold with an average recovery percentage of, I think he made an error on the decimal point, but an average recovery percentage of 50% of the original cost. So based on the sales information, the asset reaches a 20% value at just under 7 years with higher depreciation in the first 4 years. And then later he gives what he proposes as a fair depreciation schedule or percent good schedule for refrigeration equipment. So in year 1, he takes 30% off the top, and then every year after that, it's about 10% more. Where on a 12-year table, I believe the first year depreciation is only about 7%. So for some industries, that may be accurate. And there may be some years where that's accurate for supermarket equipment, but for 2018 and 2019, we don't believe that that's accurate. Okay, so now just to kind of summarize, that's the last exhibit that we have for 2018. We have some more for 2019, but it's really just more sales information. We have sales from 2018 that would apply to the 2019 lien date. And then we also have our value calculation, but it's done the exact same way that we did for 2018. So I think that if we go over that, it might be a little redundant, but if the board wants to, I can go ahead and present that now.
Mr. Buskirk?
Yes.
So we only read the information for application number 4, which is 2018 to 2019. If you'd like, I can go ahead and read application number 8 right now for 2019-2020, and you can continue presentation.
Yeah, let's go ahead and read that.
Okay, so, excuse me. Application number 8, fiscal year 2019-2020. Address is the same as before. It's 1291 Sanguinetti Road, Sonora, California, 95370. APN number 056-640-003-000, roll year 2019 to 2020, issues the value of fixtures and business personal property. Assessed values for fixtures is $419,440. That is from the assessor. Personal property amount from the assessor's office is $1,773,990 for a total of $2,193,430. The applicant's opinion of values for fixtures is $209,720. Personal property amount is $886,995 for a total of $1,096,715.
Okay, and so the next set of exhibits you have will pertain to that application, is that correct, Mr. Buskirk?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and that's starting with which exhibit?
That's starting with exhibit 20.
Okay, exhibit 20. And these are all in reference to the depreciation of equipment in retail stores of this type?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so on exhibit 20, this is basically the same thing as exhibit 3, which is our 2018 opinion of value calculation. But it's just updated information that relates to the next lien date. So we have another list of comparable sales on page 1. And for the 2019 lien date, there were really 4 that we felt best represented market value. And you can see those highlighted on page 1. So there's 3 Whole Food stores, and then we have 1 Fresh and Easy store. On this list, you can see there's quite a few Sam's Clubs, and Sam's Club, they would have some more upper end equipment, I guess you could call it. But with Sam's Club, it's a little bit different. You just think about the scale of it. Sam's Club is usually 100,000 square feet or bigger. So the makeup of the store is a little bit different, but we did want to at least look at the prices that equipment is sold for, just to see whether or not it was, I guess, congruent with what the traditional supermarket equipment was selling for. And in our opinion, it was.
Could you speak a little closer to the microphone so we can hear you?
Okay, sorry about that. So yeah, we just wanted to look at how much the Sam's Club equipment was selling for, just to see if it more or less matched what it was selling at the traditional grocery stores. But yeah, for these sales, we considered the 4 that are highlighted that you can see. Okay, and we have our sales grid here on page 2. So it includes all the sales that we used for the 2018 lien date, as well as the 4 additional sales for the 2019 lien date. You can see that we made similar adjustments. Again, for the buyer's premiums, that's always included with the sales, as well as scrapped equipment, quality, etc. And then on the right side, you can see our adjusted price per square foot right here. On page 3, we have an updated worksheet for our installation cost. And for whatever reason, for the 2019 lien date, the installation costs, it went down substantially. But we still used a 30% number. So whatever we estimated to be the market value per square foot, we added 30% to that for installation. Okay, so we see again our summary. It's just the one location. But you can see the reproduction cost new per square foot is $88. So it's a little bit higher than what it was for 2018. But that makes sense. You know, you go from one year to the next and you have to account for inflation. So it should go up at least a little bit. And then you can see our valuation summary on page 5. So it's laid out the same way as the previous year. So on the top section, we have the assessor's cost approach, which is right here. Okay, you have the different categories, the table they used, and then the resulting values. So moving down, we have our sales comparison approach. And based on the reported costs, the age increased a little bit. So we have about 10.5 years old. So that affected our market value. It went down a little bit. So we decreased it to $10 a square foot. And this is based on the sales comparables that we provided. And then we also accounted for sales tax and installation again for an overall market value of about $14 per square foot. And that gives us a final opinion of value of about $1.1 million. So comparing that to Marshall and Swift, our approach came out a little bit higher, but we're sticking by that for our opinion of value. For this lien date, Marshall and Swift actually recommends replacement costs of a little bit more than the previous year. They recommend $51.50 per square foot. So again, we adjusted for current costs and for location. We have an overall recommended replacement cost new of just over $61. So we also have to depreciate that to account for the age of the store. So we had to depreciate that by 80%. And we have a depreciated price per square foot based on Marshall and Swift of about $12 per square foot. So that gives us a total replacement cost of just over $1 million. But again, we relied on the sales comparison approach for our overall opinion of market value. And moving on to page 6, we have a similar worksheet as to what we presented for 2018. This is how we calculated the average age, and it's all based on the costs that are reported and accepted by the county. So we calculated the reproduction costs by indexing all of the historical reported costs, and then we come up with a weighted average. So our average age, like I said, was just over 10 years old, and we have a reproduction cost new per square foot of $88. And comparing the $88 a square foot to the previous page, where Marshall and Swift recommends about $62 a square foot, we see an issue there. So now this is exhibit 21. We have the current Marshall and Swift recommendation. So this was published in March of 2018. So this applies to the 2019 lien date. And you can see on the bottom, Marshall and Swift recommends a maximum of $51.50 per square foot, which is what we used. And then after the adjustments, right above that, you can see it's adjusted at about $62 a square foot. So again, life expectancy on page 2, they also recommend a range of 7 to 11 years. On page 3, we have the 9-year depreciation factors that we use based on the recommendation on the previous page. This is where we get our cost index. This is how we find our current cost multiplier. Our multiplier in this case is the same as the previous year, 1.04. So we index the cost upward by 4%. And then finally, our local multiplier. Because like I said, you need to adjust this depending on where the store is being built. And in this case, the local multiplier went up just slightly from the previous year. So we have to index that up another 15%. And then the remaining exhibits that we have pertain to the sales from 2018. I can just go over maybe one or two of them, because like I said, it's just a little bit redundant, not time efficient if I go over all of them. But this one here, you see on the screen here, I think is a little bit more relevant. It's actually, this is exhibit 22, and this sale took place in Davis. So it's nice to have something that's a little bit more relevant location-wise. This is a Whole Food store in Davis, and this sale was from March of 2018. And the sale is made up similar to what we saw before in the previous exhibits. So if we move on to page 7, they have some similar equipment to what you would see in a Safeway store. We see some more of the Husman equipment. This is from 2010 to 2012. So it's fairly new, not brand new, but about 5 to 7 years old. Page 11, we see some more from 2012 and 2013. Okay, some more Husman and Hill Phoenix equipment, fairly new. Okay, we have some freezers from 2012. Some more from 2012. So this isn't old equipment that they were selling. It's all fairly new. And then on page 54, this is where we verified the square footage. So this store is a little bit smaller than a typical Safeway. It's about 22,000 square feet, so we account for that. But when you look at these 3 years of sales, the values didn't really change a whole lot. It's been fairly consistent. But just to go ahead and wrap it up, we've seen the sales, we've seen the background on how the trend factors were determined and how they're implemented, and we see some stark differences between the two approaches. But considering that, we do understand that there is a need for the guidelines, and we don't disagree with using the guidelines and establishing a roll value. Because of high volume, mass appraisal techniques like this have to be used. But at the same time, the guidelines aren't based on any studies or market information. And when information like what we've presented today provides a more reliable indicator of market value, we think that it needs to be used in place of the guidelines. The Board of Equalization has already decided against establishing its own guideline for economic lives for the different equipment categories. And the grocery store equipment just doesn't hold a value that's consistent with the life that's recommended by the CAA. And just to reiterate, the CAA is a professional organization of assessors. They're not a governing body. They don't create laws, rules, any kind of regulations. Also, when equipment is sold, it routinely sells for only a fraction of that location's roll value. There was an article that we presented that talked about the cost of ownership, or what they called a remaining obsolescence factor, where it says that the property's value drops by 50% as soon as it goes from new to used. Just to kind of summarize the different key factors that adversely affect the value of this store's equipment, we consider things like shrinking average store size, internet sales, advances in technology, regulations. Another thing that I didn't mention was an increased market share of lower tier companies. So maybe 15 years ago, or actually more, maybe 20 to 30 years ago, the bigger companies like your Safeways, your Krogers, they had a substantially larger share of the market. I believe it was around 50 or 60%. but now in current times, it's about half of that. And considering that, that's what's really driven down the market value of used equipment. When you have lower tier grocery stores that are coming in there to buy all the used equipment, they don't have the same aesthetic standards that the upper tier stores have. They don't have the same standards in equipment quality. So that really gives them more bargaining power when they're buying this equipment. So that's really driven the values down. So with that being said, I would just ask that the board rule in favor of the applicant for the values that were found in Exhibit 1. And that would conclude our case in chief.
All right, thank you, Mr. Buskirk. So at this time, I'll look to see if there are any questions from the board on what we've heard from the applicant regarding the evidence we've heard so far. Okay, I see Supervisor Kirk has some questions.
Sure.
Just a couple, if you could bear with me for a minute. This is kind of high level, 30,000 elevation foot question. Sears is owned by Albertsons, correct?
I'm sorry?
Sears is owned by Albertsons?
Sears?
Yes. I'm
Safeway.
sorry, Safeway.
Safeway, yes, it's owned by
Sorry.
Albertsons.
Do you know how Albertsons computes, and again, I'm reading from notes I came up during the last couple hours. Do you know how they compute their asset values for equipment? Is it the same that you're presenting today?
How the county calculates those values?
No, how Albertsons. Is it one and the same, how they're assessing their equipment value? Is it any different than Safeway?
Albertsons doesn't calculate the value. They just report the cost. And that's how Safeway does it as well.
Okay.
So they take the cost to acquire the equipment and they report that on the property statement. And then the county takes those costs, they apply a trend factor, and that, in theory, is supposed to give you market value. But that's done the same it's supposed to be done the same for every grocery store in the county.
Okay. And then, I'm sure you're familiar with the Securities and Exchange Commission,
Yes.
SEC. Okay. So for those of you who don't know, because I had to do a quick Google search just to make sure I was aware of the exact verbiage, but it is the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, is an independent federal government regulatory agency responsible for protecting investors, maintaining fair and orderly functioning of the securities markets, and facilitating capital information. So my question, there's a bunch of rules and regulations for the Securities and Exchange Commission. I'm not too familiar with, but I know they have rules and regulations. When Albertsons, I did a Google search of their stock, 1.9 billion. When they report their values to the Security and Exchange Commission, is that the same value that's kind of being reported to the board today?
So those values that they would report, I don't know exactly what they report to the SEC, but I would imagine that it also includes things that are intangible. It's something that you kind of give the general label of goodwill. But intangibles are not assessable for property tax. So on the property statement, it gives us the resulting roll value from the county. That's only the cost to acquire the equipment. So whatever they report to the SEC or whatever they report for federal income tax purposes is probably a little bit different than what they report for property tax. Okay,
so you kind of see where I'm going at. Like if their valuation is as such to drive up their stock in a sense, then would that same evaluation be presented today as far as assets? And it sounds like there's a little bit of a difference.
No, we wouldn't present that same thing.
Okay, so I think we need to stick to the assessed value. Did you have any other questions?
Yeah, I do have one last question. I think it was, I know it was I believe this is my last question. And I think we'll hear from the assessor's office. On the assessment appeals narrative on page 3 under cost approach, it says, furthermore, the assessor's valuation is significantly inconsistent with the replacement cost published by Marshall and Swift. And from hearing your presentation, it sounded like a lot of the information you're comparing equipment costs to was from the Marshall and Swift report. Is that correct?
Well, it's something that we use to support our sales comparison approach.
Okay.
Well, not support it, but just to show
Some comparison or some difference?
to compare its accuracy.
Okay. All right, that's it.
Supervisor Campbell. I just wanted to chime in to make sure that if your board has done any additional research outside of what evidence is being presented today, I would ask that you disclose it on the record, just to remind your board that your decision will be made based on all of the evidence presented today. So I just want to make sure the record's clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Supervisor Brennan, did you have any questions?
No, thank you.
Okay, and I don't have any questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Buskirk, for that. At this time, I'll look to the County Assessor's Office. You have an opportunity to cross-examine the applicant first, and then present what evidence you would like.
This is Janelle Myers. I guess the only question I really have is if the refrigeration regulations are ever changing, wouldn't it be better to do the state valuation study at some point, just so that this issue doesn't keep coming up over the years?
I mean, possibly, but it's something that we're not required to do. And it's something that it's typically a joint effort. That effort, it usually consists of not just the taxpayers, but it could be their agents and the assessor's office as well. The last time that a study like that was done that I'm aware of was about 10 years ago. And that was for the offset lithographic presses. And that process took a couple of years to complete. And in that case, the presses got their own life table. So if you look at the tables that are recommended by CAA, that study is incorporated into the full set of tables they recommend. But it's not an easy or quick process to do. And like I said, it comes as the result of cooperation from different parties. And that's one of the things that makes it so difficult.
Christopher Schmidt, I'm Deputy County Counsel. I'm assigned to the Assessor's Office, and I just have a couple questions. I just want to make the record clear. Is the Sonora store 26 years old?
I'm sorry, was that a question for me?
Yes.
Yeah, so this is Deputy
Yeah,
County
I
Counsel.
don't know when the store opened. It might be, you might be right. But when I mentioned the age of the equipment, that was of the equipment, not the building itself.
Okay, I just want to get information about this particular store in Tuolumne County, Clear. Do you know how many major renovations were done in that time since it opened?
I might have that information somewhere, but it's not included in the presentation. It looks like the last major renovation you can see on the costs that were reported, it may have been 2009.
So we've had one major renovation since that time?
No, not necessarily. Any other renovation that took place prior to that, those costs may have been removed already.
I'm talking about renovations where there would be a major change of equipment.
Right. No, I understand. Let me go back to that exhibit real quick. So I'm looking at the costs that were reported. I can just share my screen here. Okay, so this is how we calculated the average age. So in the column that I'm circling here, this is the store equipment. And we can see the biggest acquisition was in 2009. So when we're looking at the 2018 lien date, it was about 9 years prior, right? So there was probably more than likely a few renovations before that, but those costs may have already been removed. We see some older costs from 1994, but that's probably just a few pieces of equipment. That may not even be accurate. It's really difficult, if not impossible, to have a 100% accurate record of this equipment because it comes in and out, and it's not always recorded.
Based on the information we know, Safeway's been using the same equipment since 2009.
Yes, based on these reported costs, they're reporting that this equipment has been in use since then, and that it's in use as of the lien date.
Regarding the grocery stores, the high-tech grocery stores like Amazon Go, do you know how close the nearest store like that is to Sonora, such that it would affect whether or not it makes equipment in Sonora obsolete?
The point of that article that I presented was that that's going to be the norm in the near future, and that it has an effect on the obsolescence of current equipment. If people know that that's going to be the norm, they're not going to make a huge investment in the equipment now.
I don't have any.
But I believe that store they're referencing in the article may have been in Washington.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any more questions for the applicant? Okay. At this time, you can present exhibits to the board.
My name is Janelle Myers. I've been the auditor appraiser here in Tuolumne County for a little over 2 years. I've done annually about 1,500 of these personal property assessments every the 2 years I've been here, from January until June is when we process these. I have my bachelor's degree in business administration and a concentration in accounting from California State University, Stanislaus, and I am a county employee of 12 years, and 6 of those years have been in an accounting or fiscal capacity. In your first exhibit, I have all the definitions, which Mr. Buskirk pretty much also covered. So you have your fair market value, your personal property definition, your cost approach definitions, and it refers to all the revenue and taxation codes, the State Board of Equalization tax rules, and our handbooks. Our Exhibit 2 is going to be his the actual opinions of value that he had submitted to me back in August, which are different than the ones he presented today.
In what way different?
Well, his average age, he is about the same, but the overall opinions of value, the totals, are, it looks like for 2018, from what he presented today, looks like the total for the sales comparison approach was about $400,000 lower.
Could you
what he presented today.
Point to me where I can see that?
Exhibit 2
So
on the first page.
Oh, just, okay.
I don't have a side-by-side because I don't have his in front of me from today.
Do we have the technology to project that?
I don't know, I don't have his handy.
I think to be fair to the appellant, that ought to be up on the screen. Okay, so he has it in hard or in electronic version.
She's working on that,
Okay.
but, I'm sorry, Heather, do we need to take a pause? Because it's really important that he has everything right now, so maybe we should take a pause in the proceedings to make sure he has everything, that he can access it. Okay.
Okay. So we will take, so do we want to, how much longer do you think this is going to take? Because we're in 10, so if we pause for 10 minutes, then we'll be into noon. So do we want to just break for lunch?
Maybe.
Or-
I'm not sure how much the assessor has left. Mr. Buzzkirk, can you let us know if you have been able to access the assessor's exhibits?
I think he's muted. Are you still with us, Mr. Buzzkirk?
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay. Do you have access to the assessor's exhibits?
I wasn't given any of the exhibits, or I wasn't given a link to download them.
He just got an email, so if you can check your email.
Let me take a look. It was in my email?
So let's, so do we want to, looking at the board here, do we want to break for lunch or kind of power through?
I want to get through it.
Okay. So let's take a 10-minute break. We'll reconvene at noon, and we'll get, we'll make sure that we have all the evidence shared that we need to. Okay, we'll go ahead and reconvene the meeting of the Tuolumne County Board of Equalization. Sherry, are you with us?
Yes,
Supervisor
I am.
Brennan? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So we were making sure that the applicant had access to the exhibits. Mr. Buskirk, do you have that information?
Yeah, I just got the email and I'm opening the attachments right now.
Okay. So the question I had asked was, we were talking about, I guess, Exhibit 2, is that correct?
Yes.
And you had said that there were elements in the exhibit that did not match
Yeah.
what
Well,
was
he-
presented earlier.
In communication with him, when I first got the application, he submitted me a similar set of documents that he presented today, but I noticed that the opinion of value that he presented today for both years were different than what, I mean, it doesn't change my presentation at all. but there is a little bit of a difference between the values. And it looks like the Marshall and Swift calculations he initially submitted to me were different because some of the multipliers weren't included in mine. Like I said, it doesn't change much for what I'm presenting today.
Okay.
But, okay, moving forward. So we'll probably start at Exhibit 4. So Exhibit 4, I'm not going to go into too much detail on this because he has some of that in his, but it's a more detailed assessed value report. The first, 5 pages are for 2018, and then there's page 6 is the factors that are used for 2018. And then 7 forward to 11 is 2019, and then page 14 is going to be those factors. And then if you look at page 13 and 14, mainly page 13, you have this. These are the equipment costs that are reported. And this is only for the 12-year fixtures. I didn't include any of the 10-year or anything like that in there. It shows that 72 and 71% of the equipment costs are from 2009 and prior. So in the last, from 2010 to 2018 and 2019, they didn't really purchase a whole lot of new equipment. And then the next page is pretty much just to the current year, and it's still 3/4 of their equipment is from 2009 and prior. And here's a little bit of history about our Sonora Safeway. I don't have an exhibit to go with this. It's just poking through their file and just knowing about the store. The store was built in 1994, and it was originally a Pack and Save Foods, which is a Safeway company. This store was Pack and Save until 2009 when they did their only major remodel. From what our records, we can tell that is the only year they have purchased a bulk amount of equipment and replaced some equipment. From 2009 to present, there has not been any major remodels or large-scale equipment replacements that we have been assessing on a 12-year life. So they have not included much more in addition to that $2 million remodel back in 2009. And then for perspective, Safeway, it sits in the same parking lot as a new Walmart Supercenter. It is less than a mile away from a similar size grocery store, Safe Mart, and it's still holding its own. It's still a very busy store. There's not much competition for it in our area. We assess all of our grocery stores, including Walmart and even Priceco, on a 12-year life. So all the same equipment that all the stores carry and have in their stores, they're all being assessed the same. If you look at Exhibit 5, that is our...
I'm going to have you back up for a second. So if you entered it, I might have missed it. Did you enter Exhibit 3 into evidence? Because we went from 2 to 4.
Exhibit 3 is, that shows a comparison of our enrolled values compared to his opinion of values that he had given to me back in August.
Supervisor Campbell, one thing that may just make this process easier is if we just formally state that the exhibits and documentation presented by both parties will be entered into evidence and made part of the record.
Okay, do you need me to do that?
No, we can just, well, go ahead, yeah, I guess.
Okay, so the evidence submitted by both parties will be entered into the record. Thank you. So go. You can continue. I think we were on Exhibit 5.
Yeah. Okay. Exhibit 5 is just the full Assessor's Handbook 581 that shows, again, pieces of the factors that we use. So if you go to page 7, on the bottom right corner, it says page 7. It shows the table 1, and then if you go further into page page 16, it says 12 on the bottom. That's the life tables. So he already showed those in his presentation also. And then Exhibit 6 is the CAA guidelines. So we use these, and we use them to assess all of the grocery stores in our county, which we don't really have very many. And we use these as guidelines because the trend here in our county, even looking at Safeway or SafeMart, our stores do not remodel on a regular basis. They're not on that 5 to 10 year timeline. They're not on that 8-year timeline. They're on more of a 12 to 15 year timeline. So if you look at when Pack and Save first opened, they didn't do any major work or replacement in that store until 2009, and they opened in 1994. And even currently, they still have not done any of that equipment replacement. When, if you look at Exhibit 8, this is the state form, the 571L, the business property statement that the businesses fill out every year. So these get turned in, and a lot of times they do include a lot of backup. And Safeway is actually one of the companies that they include really detailed information with their annual filings. They include full equipment listings of when they purchase them, and the preparers of these statements for Safeway even classify the equipment on those statements as 12-year, 10-year, 8-year. They classify them in life table, not life tables, but they class them in a life category. I actually go through those statements and their backup line by line, and if I feel that there's something that maybe might not fit in the 12-year life, I might move it to a 10-year life. So like cash registers, he pointed out that most other counties would classify that in 12. I tend to move that to a 10-year life. So not everything that's lumped in that 12-year life is necessarily everything that other counties may put there. But the refrigeration and the shelving and like produce, bakery, deli, all of that equipment is in that 12-year life. But like I said, we use these as guidelines, but our local information and data shows that a 12 or 15-year life is more fitting to our local market.
Could I ask a question on, it's on Exhibit 5, the Assessor's Handbook?
Yes.
Is it reasonable to say that most counties would rely on this Assessor's Handbook to do evaluations?
Most counties do. There are some counties, larger counties, that do have written procedures where they may do something different just because you have counties like LA or San Diego. San Diego has 50 Vons Safeway stores on its own. So they have Vons and Safeways competing with Vons and Safeways. Whereas we have Safeway competing with SafeMart and Walmart.
Thank you.
So Exhibit 7, I kind of went back one. It's part of the issue paper issued in 2008 for, by the State Board of Equalization, it does state in there, so on page 2, I have in pink that it, in view of increasing interest by industry and the board became more involved in developing data for county assessors using the valuing personal property equipment and the board's direction to conduct studies to make the data contained in the AH 581 as factual as possible. Staff believes that the January 2009 revision of AH 581 should contain recommended economic lives. I also did a brief inquiry in Calaveras County, which has a Save Mart, and Amador County, which has a Safeway, because they're similar communities. They're very small. They don't have very much grocery competition in either area. And their stores are on a similar timeline as ours, where they don't remodel very often. And if you look at our Save Mart, they've been open for 28 years. And they've just now did a major remodel and rebranding in the last 2 or 3 years. And then using the local data that's in Exhibit 9, it's got the State Board of Equalization letter dated in 1996. It goes back to using the handbook and the regulations as a guide. But it says they were developed by ASD staff throughout the state for typical situations and may not represent the best available local information. So like I said, I use our local information as looking at our individual grocery stores. Go to Exhibit 10. So in Exhibit 10, I have a couple of articles. One of them is this, I think, is the same as one that is in some of Mr. Buskirk's exhibits. The first one, there's a lot of larger areas where they do remodel stores on the 5 to 10 year timeline. This first page in this exhibit, it says stores should be remodeled every 5 to 10 years. But ultimately, competitors will determine a renovation's lifespan in areas with little competition. So if there's not very many competitors in an area, they will not have to remodel as often. The next page says retailers strive to get the most bang for their capital improvement buck and outshine competitions. So it refers to remodeling being done because of competition, not necessarily because the equipment becomes obsolete. The next page, stores remodel for countless reasons, but most boil down to competition. And the next page, 99 times out of 100, the impetus to remodel is going to be competition. So the 5 to 10 year timeline may be accurate in larger counties where there's more competition, but we feel like in our area, in Tuolumne County, and even in the surrounding areas, the 5 to 10 year life is not what is being practiced. Now, touching on using auction sales, most of this is just going to refer back to some of the definitions that are up in the first exhibit with the fair market value and the terms for personal property. But in Exhibit 11, it says auctions due to forced sales and bankruptcy or foreclosure would generally not be considered reliable indicators of fair value. All of the samples of auctions that were presented to me back in August were 4 stores that had been sold. So when you have stores that have been sold, they're trying to push that equipment to be removed faster. We feel like these auctions, they don't meet the requirements needed in Revenue and Taxation Code 110A. First, the sales don't meet the requirement of being exposed to the open market. If they're in-person sales, you kind of have to have cash on hand. Not everybody has the ability to go to a on-site auction and have a bunch of cash to buy a bunch of equipment. So it's open to people looking to open grocery stores or markets, but if somebody's just starting out to do a small market, they not be able to have that capability. The equipment is sold only to those who have cash on hand, and it has to be picked up off of the property immediately. One other downside for buyers buying the equipment in these auctions is that they have no guarantee of the quality of the equipment. They don't know if it's going to continue working. They don't know how long it's going to work. It could work for a couple months, could work for a couple of years. They can get 10 more years out of the usage of this equipment. And another point on the auctions is that reasonable time is an issue because of the need and want. In all the examples that I was given, these stores were closures. They want to get this equipment off the property as soon as they can, so they can eliminate the cost of continuing to occupy the location that is closed. Another factor taken into consideration with auctions is with an in-person auction, costs associated with installation and shipping or moving the equipment, and the value of any other benefits that might be included in purchasing equipment brand new are not available to a person buying from an auction unless they seek those services from another outside provider. When used equipment sells in any market, installation, shipping costs, and value for included benefits is not included in the resale. The buyer of the used equipment must seek out any of those needs, so any installation to install at the new location. So when Safeway or any other grocery stores buys equipment new, installation costs are included in the assessment. So when they go to sell it, installation costs are not included in the sale. But when the new buyer of the used equipment, they can include their installation costs when they go and report their used equipment on their business property statement. When buyers purchase used equipment from these auctions, I mentioned before, they are faced with the unknown in the quality of the equipment. They have to worry about the unknown maintenance and parts without having the equipment covered by the benefit of a warranty. But I will make note that warranties are actually not accessible if there's an additional cost to have that warranty. But if you were to buy a piece of equipment new, but that warranty was included in the purchase price and it wasn't a separate cost, then the warranty would be included in the benefit of having the new equipment. And then one other point that I wanted to make was that in communication with Mr. Buskirk over the last couple of months, he did point out to me that Safeway and Vons, they rarely ever sell equipment in auctions anymore. It's usually kept for spare parts or scrapped. So we view that as them getting more use out of this equipment because they're continuing to use it, even if it's just to repair their existing equipment. And another thing I've noticed with our particular stores is when they report some of their equipment on their business property statements, they will include, for example, say for 2020, they reported new equipment that was actually acquired in 2015. That means they're they're moving equipment from a store they may have remodeled and placing it in our store versus buying new equipment in our store or selling it off. I think my last point that I wanted to make today was the concept of value. There's a difference between how an appraiser and accountant views the concept of value. We're viewing his concept, asking for the obsolescence adjustments and depreciation, more as an accountant's concept versus an appraiser's concept. The description of this concept is in Assessor's Handbook 504. It's pages 49 and 50. If you go back to Exhibit 1, it's on page 11. It distinguishes the difference between the two. The annual lien date value of personal property, which must reflect market value, is unrelated to net book value, capitalized cost, less depreciation. Reflected on an assessee's books, fair market value is defined in appraisal terms, and net book value is defined in accounting terms, are separate concepts. Any similarity is merely coincidental. It is important to recognize the difference. The court has said the accountant deals with past historical costs in the present to the present owner, and by the process of amortization spreads the cost of property over its useful life. An unamortized cost reflected on the balance sheet has no relation to the full cash value, the price that a willing buyer would pay a willing seller. As mentioned earlier, an appraiser's concept of value is full cash value or fair market value, or simply market value. As of the lien date, in contrast, the accountant's concept of value is normally the book value of the property, the capitalized assets acquisition cost less depreciation. The appraiser views the concept of value as full cash value or fair market value. So if they're selling these things at auctions, the buyers they're not necessarily they're not being sold at the full market value because it's not necessarily including the installation costs or shipping costs, depending on how they buy it at auction. If they buy it on an online auction, they're going to pay shipping, so that would be included. If they're buying it on site, they don't have to pay the shipping costs right there. Would probably be something like they would have a moving truck or a company come in and pick up all the equipment that they would be buying, and then they would turn around and have to pay installation. So the auction sales price doesn't reflect the actual dollar amount that they are being assessed on, because the assessment includes those. And then on Exhibit 12, it kind of touches on a little bit of that. On page 3, I have the section highlighted in pink where it talks about how those costs that are included in the initial assessment are not included in when they buy the equipment used. And I think that's about all that I have for today. I would want to, Rachel had a couple of things to say.
We also wanted to touch a little bit on the use of Marshall and Swift valuation systems. Marshall and Swift is a national, they might even be international, I know they're a national corporation that puts out a valuation book that we use. In general, we usually use that for costing out brand new industrial, commercial type buildings, fast food restaurants, the cancer center, big storage units. That's what Marshall and Swift is usually used for. If you read the beginning of the section where he got his numbers, the 4950, it says at the beginning of that section, in Marshall and Swift's words, these numbers are very rough. And they use the words very rough because you're taking a company that values nationally and trying to narrow it down specifically to grocery stores and grocery store equipment, and now grocery store equipments in California and grocery store equipment in Tuolumne County, California. That's why they have these different multipliers. That's why we think that the most accurate assessment for our Safeway store is us using our appraiser judgment here for Tuolumne County. It's location, location, location. This is one Safeway store in a small county. We do understand some of these arguments when you are in a big market like LA or San Diego. Most of his sales all came from big, very big markets. LA, San Diego. Also, there were a few Vaughn stores in there, which is not, they are a Safeway company, but they're not a Safeway brand company. And a lot, those stores are distressed sales. They are stores going out of business. Also, from our information that we understand from Mr. Buskirk, Safeway isn't buying at those stores. And there's very little equipment of Safeways at those auctions. And that's why they were having to do different price adjustments for the quality of the equipment. So we don't feel that Marshall and Swift is a great indicator of value. Also, in Tax Rule 6, it says that replacement and reproduction costs, which in appraisal terms, replacement and reproduction are actually used very differently. I would argue that he was talking a replacement cost new, not a reproduction cost new. A reproduction is an exact replica, usually used for very unique items that you're appraising, very, or historical. Replacement is a laptop computer that's a Dell and a Asus laptop computer that does the same thing. One is replacing the other, but they're not maybe exactly the same. So I would argue that it's a replacement cost, but it makes a very, very specific point, which he left out, which is this works for construction in progress because it's brand new, or things that have experienced relatively little physical deterioration. Replacement cost does not work well when things have deteriorated because then, or have any kind of depreciation, because there's all kinds of different depreciation factors. So we do make the argument that Marshall and Swift is just not probably, we would never use Marshall and Swift. We would use it if they were building a brand new Safeway store, even though that's not how we would cost out the business equipment. But if they were building a brand new Safeway shell, that's what we would use as Marshall and Swift, but not for business equipment. Our other argument a little bit is that the square footage equipment cost as a factor of the square footage of a store is a very difficult valuation. If you have a cost per square foot of what it sold in a store, a Fresh and Easy store that was 20,000 square feet, you put it in another store that's 30,000 square feet, and that store goes out of business, and you sell that equipment again, does the cost per square foot go down? It's the same equipment. It's a very difficult valuation for, we don't value cars on what they weigh, or the square, the inches, the square inches inside of a car is not part of the valuation for a used car. And I would argue that the store that the equipment is sitting in, and the size of the store the equipment is sitting in, is not completely relevant to the quality and the value and the fair market value of that equipment. You could have very high-end equipment sitting in a very small store or a very large store, or very poor equipment sitting in different size stores. That to me is a very difficult valuation. Also, I would take argument with California Assessors Association actually does propose legislation, and they aren't an assessor social group. They are made up of all of the assessors all over California. They have a lot of say in legislature and property tax law, because these are the people actually implementing property tax law all across California. And they use each other as a resource continually. So they actually are a very, very valuable resource for fair implementation of property tax law, because they're actually implementing it, as opposed to the Board of Equalization, who is trying to make things fair across the state. These are the people that are actually talking to people, walking into your office and talking to people, and homeowners and business owners. These are the people dealing with them and assessing them face to face. So they're a very good resource. I think that concludes our presentation today. If you have any questions for us.
So what I'll do is I'll give the applicant an opportunity to cross-examine the assessor's office, and then I'll look to the board if they have any questions for you after that. Mr. Buskirk, do you have any questions for the assessor?
Yeah, I have a few questions. So my first question is, I'm looking at Exhibit 1, and you have your definitions laid out, but the remainder of the exhibits look like they're basically just the applicant's exhibits. Is that correct?
Well, I wanted to show, I used your opinions of value, and then on Exhibit 3, I was comparing that to our enrolled values. But since what you presented today was different than what I had based my presentation off, I didn't really go into too much depth on that.
I guess what I'm getting at is, so you
I
have
did
numbers.
use some of your articles that was submitted to me just to point out that there was some contradictions in them stating that the 5 to 10 year life was also saying that it also depends on location, and a lot of it was dependent on competition, whereas we don't have that in our area.
Well, I guess the point that I'm getting at is, it looks like about 90% of your presentation is just rebuttal evidence. So I'm wondering, do you actually have any independent evidence to support your opinion of value?
Independent evidence would be showing that on Exhibit 4, that most of the equipment in our Safeway store is more, is older than 2009. Only 29% of the equipment for the 2 years that we are here for today would be fitting into the, you said the average age is 8 years and the average age was 10.6 years. But a lot of that equipment is in 2009 and prior.
So then, is age the only indicator of market value?
I would say the indicator of market value would be how
Or is
much.
it the only factor to consider for market value?
What was that?
I guess I could just rephrase it by saying, is age the only factor that you would consider for market value?
In our local community, it is a major factor that we consider in how we assess our all of our businesses, because there's such a low competition that the equipment is not getting replaced on the timelines that you are suggesting.
Okay, so then besides age, do you have any information relating to the value of the equipment? Anything that's just specifically for value?
I have attached the full assessment packet for both years
No. Okay, so
with the
let me,
factors that I have used.
okay, I'll rephrase that then. Do you have anything to support the factors that you've used? Any market data that supports the 12-year life being accurate and the resulting value being accurate?
No, I do not. I do not have any sales that I looked up independent of your auctions that you provided.
Are there any studies relating to the trend factors that kind of tell you about their accuracy and if it provides an accurate estimate of value?
I have included the CAA guidelines and the AH 581 handbook, which you very well enforce that they are to be used as guidelines, but we use our best local data, our knowledge of our local market to determine that the guidelines work for our area.
Right. And I agree with using the guidelines initially, but do you have anything supporting those guidelines themselves? Anything that shows that the guidelines are accurate?
We don't have anything supporting that they're not accurate other than auction sales that you've provided us. So if we don't agree with the auction sales, we also don't have anything else telling us that they're not accurate. We use the numbers provided for us from Safeway as our starting point and do that consistently across the market. So we also don't have anything telling us blatantly these aren't accurate.
And I wanted to mention that we classify most of this equipment as Safeway reports it to us on the life that they have determined on their paperwork, with some adjustments based on how we put cash registers, like the check stand, not the computer systems, on a 10 versus a 12.
Okay, I'll follow up on that then. So you say that you value the reported costs based on how Safeway classifies them, and I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, for the most part.
They have a note on their reporting that shows the store equipment. It says 12-year life or signs
Yes.
12. So do you know where that information comes from?
It comes from whoever, the person that reports it to me and whoever does their accounting records.
Right. No, not that. I mean, if it says store equipment 12-year life, do you know where that note itself comes from?
Somewhere within Safeway's system.
So they use a software, and that software just by default shows a 12-year life. And
I don't know. I haven't been in the Safeway's accounting system, so that's something that you would have to ask them, whether or not when they put in the equipment they buy, whether or not they get to choose where they put it, or if it's defaulted by the type of equipment they put in.
So then when they report their costs on the property statement, if it said store equipment 8-year life, does that mean you would put it on an 8-year life?
It doesn't actually just say store equipment. They're actually pretty detailed in the records they submit. So it'll tell us if it's a cash register. They'll tell us if it's a point of sale system. They'll tell us if it's shelving,
Right.
bakery, deli, and they'll go into detail if it's ovens, meat slicers, pharmacy equipment, or shelves. I already said shelves, but produce equipment. They go into pretty good detail. It doesn't just say store equipment.
Well, now I'm talking about the category.
Oh,
where
the
they have it.
category?
But if the category name said store equipment 8-year life, because you made a point to say that they say it's 12 years, so you put it on 12 years. If they say it's on an 8-year life, would you put it on an 8-year life?
If it was fitting, yes.
So do you have any additional market research on this industry?
No.
Have you spoken to any industry experts, somebody that might buy and sell this equipment?
We've spoken to other stores in other counties.
People that work in the store?
Yes.
Do those people buy and sell the equipment or have any kind of knowledge about the equipment's value?
They don't buy and sell the equipment, but they are there working when equipment is moved in and out of the store, so they are aware of that.
But they don't have any knowledge about the value. Is that correct?
Likely not.
Excuse me, Mr. Buskirk.
Sure.
I think the fundamental disagreement here is on the methodology. You're trying to find out if they went out and used your methodology. I'm not sure that goes to the fundamental disagreement. I may be missing something, but that's...
I'm not trying to establish whether or not they use the same methodology, but I'm trying to establish whether or not any independent market research went into the presentation.
So,
Because what it looks like to me is that they've relied on the guidelines, and I don't see anything supporting the guidelines or anything actually refuting the applicant's opinion of value. Any kind of independent market data.
And that goes to the fundamental disagreement on methodology.
Right.
Okay. I think they're probably willing to accede to the fact that they didn't attempt to use your methodology.
Well,
Is that accurate?
We absolutely concede that we don't agree with the methodology and we don't use it in our office.
Okay,
And so
thank
we
you.
did not do that.
okay, did you have any other questions for the assessor?
Yeah, just a couple.
Okay.
I'm just trying to go through my notes here to make sure I don't repeat myself. So you made a point about auctions and the buyers having cash on hand. I kind of missed that. Can you just kind of reiterate what point you were making?
I was just stating that if it was an in-person auction, if they were there buying the equipment, it's a cash on hand exchange or cashier's check or something along those lines. They can't go in with like a credit card or something like that, like they can if it was an online situation. So online auctions, they probably are given those options, where in person they are not.
So you're saying that they're limited to pay with cash?
As far as I know, our knowledge, yes.
Okay. Did you take a look at the auction data that we provided?
The online, like I just mentioned, online auctions, I can see how they can have other payment options.
Okay. So you also mentioned that there were some cases where a prior year may have increased the cost, or they may have increased cost in a prior year, and that you assume that it's because they were transferring equipment?
Yes, I've noticed that with several of our major retailers in our county, where sometimes they will report equipment acquired in a prior year, but it was just moved into our county, in our location, in our county.
So then is that always the case?
It's not always the case, but it is a very common occurrence with most of our major retailers.
And is it possible that sometimes that may be a capitalized repair?
It is possible.
I think that's all I have.
Okay. So at this time, I'll look if there are any questions from the board for the assessor's office. Okay. So what is the burden of proof for the assessor's argument? And in your view, what is the burden of proof for proving that the applicant's argument is not?
Supervisor Campbell, I can answer that. It's preponderance of evidence.
Okay. So So is it necessary for you, I guess I'm trying to get at it, is it standard for you to present proof that the guidelines which you are using are accurate when the applicant is arguing that they're not?
Under Rule 321, Property Tax Rule 321, Section A, subject to exceptions set by law, it is presumed that the assessor has properly performed his or her duties. So we aren't under, it is presumed that we have used our best judgment, we have followed the appropriate guidelines, and we've made an accurate assessment. It is the applicant's burden of proof to show that we have assessed this incorrectly, which frankly goes back to our property tax study evaluation. If you're saying in this particular situation in Tuolumne County, you wanted us to use our appraiser judgment, which is a common term we use, that there are particular things about this store that we assessed inaccurately, we feel that we have particularly used our appraiser judgment in this case because when you look at the surrounding stores and our particular Safeway store, you could almost make the argument that a 15-year life would be more accurate than a 12-year life. So we feel by using a 12-year life, we have been fair to the taxpayer. As Janelle said, she goes line by line through these property tax statements, and if she feels anything needs to be moved into another life table, she does so. That's using our judgment. If you feel that the state of California needs to reassess how they're looking at business property for grocery stores across the state, such as we should be using auction data as a guideline to assess grocery store equipment across the state, then you go to a property tax valuation because you're trying to change how grocery stores are assessed across the state. If you're looking at just our county, which is what we're looking at here today, we do feel that we have followed the proper guidelines and used our appraiser judgment fairly and accurately for this applicant.
So I'm sorry if I might interject. The assessor referenced property tax rule 321 and that there's a presumption that the assessor has properly performed his or her duty. But in that very same rule, it says that this presumption is not evidence and shall not be considered by the board. So even though the assessor is presumed to be correct, that's simply to put the burden of proof on the applicant.
Right.
And once we get to the assessment appeals board, both sides have to present independent evidence.
And that's accurate, but the burden is on the applicant by preponderance of evidence to prove that they have their position is the one that should be used to value the property.
But the point that I'm making is that when we get to the hearing, both sides need to present evidence, and the preponderance of evidence standard applies to both.
Okay, that point is taken. Are there any other questions from the board for either the applicant or the assessor? Okay, so I think what we'll do is we'll move into the evidentiary portion of the hearing, and we'll.
Actually, Supervisor Campbell, either side has an opportunity to present rebuttal evidence.
Excuse me, you're right. So at this time, I'll look to the applicant. Mr. Buskirk, do you have any evidence to provide rebuttal to the opposing side's evidence or arguments?
No, I don't.
Okay. And the same question for the assessor?
If there's no rebuttal, there's no sure rebuttal, is there?
No, we don't.
Okay. All right. Now,
And then the applicant shall be given an opportunity to provide a closing argument.
okay. All right, Mr. Buskirk, do you have a closing argument?
I believe since we've got the burden of proof, we get the final say. So I can reserve our right to closing for after the assessor's closing.
That's fine.
All right. So does the assessor's office have a closing argument?
I would repeat, actually, I think I probably already made our closing argument, is that we feel that the life table that we are using is an accurate and fair assessment of fair market value. Just because it came from the Board of Equalization doesn't mean it's wrong. We use these kind of guidelines to for property taxes for everything that everybody is taxed on from the assessor's office. And for the most part, we've found them to be pretty accurate. And we don't feel that this is the appropriate venue for changing how grocery stores are assessed. And in this particular case, it is a fair assessment in our particular market, in our particular county for this single grocery store.
All right, thank you. Mr. Buskirk.
Yeah, so just want to thank the board for taking the time to hear us out today. I just want to remind you that according to Property Tax Rule 321, this case needs to be decided by a preponderance of the evidence. And as far as the applicant can tell, the only evidence that the assessors provided is the applicant's own evidence. We haven't seen anything that actually supports the 12-year guideline that's recommended by the CAA. And again, it's recommended by the CAA. It's not recommended by the Board of Equalization. And it's just a recommendation. So we don't disagree with the recommended guideline as far as setting a starting point to value, which you saw in the evidence that we presented. But we do have a right to appeal. And when we file that appeal, we have to dig a little deeper and we have to see whether or not that guideline is accurate. And to say that this isn't the proper venue for this type of adjustment, it's really denying the applicant due process, in our opinion. If that was the case, then there would be no point in filing appeals. But we do also agree that the numbers that Marshall and Swift provide are rough. The assessor made a point to say that those numbers are rough. And we don't disagree with that. It's an estimate. Anytime you do that type of cost approach where you're rebuilding some kind of property, it is going to be rough. But it's not so rough that it cuts the roll value in half. That's just way too big of a discrepancy to fall back on the fact that the numbers are rough. We've also provided the sales information, and that's really what Marshall and Swift was intended for on our end. We just wanted to have something to support that the sales information was accurate. We made the proper adjustments. We didn't just take the sales prices for exactly what they were. There are adjustments that have to go into it, and that's the case with any other sales comparison approach. We believe that the sales information is relevant. The Board of Equalization has already said that auction sales could be considered market sales as long as they meet the specific definition of fair market value. And this is the typical way that this equipment sells. I've spoken with many people in the industry personally, and they have all agreed that this is the way that this type of property exchanges hands from seller to buyer. So we stand by our values. And again, the board is not required to pick between the values of either party, but the board is allowed to make its own decision about what it thinks fair market value is. So again, thank you for listening, and we just ask that you rule or you decide in favor of the applicant.
All right, thank you very much. I'll look to County Council. I think at this time we'll be moving into to deliberate in private with the end of the evidentiary portion of the hearing.
Yes, I would suggest that we see if there's any public comment, and then we can have the board go into closed session for the deliberation.
Okay, I'm looking to the back of the room. We do not have any public comment at this time, so we will We will recess into private deliberation. So I'll reconvene the hearing of the Tuolumne County Board of Equalization. The board met to deliberate on the matter before us. The Board of Equalization has considered all the evidence presented by the parties and hereby affirms the decision of the assessor. The motion was made by Supervisor Rotifer and seconded by Supervisor Gray. Okay. So I'll reopen the meeting of the Tuolumne County Board of Equalization. A motion was made by Supervisor Rotifer and seconded by Supervisor Gray. Board of Equalization has considered all the evidence presented by the parties and hereby affirms the decision of the assessor. With that, I will close the meeting of the Board of Equalization. Thank you.